Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you are watching first part of What If Kid Naruto Became Most Wanted Assassin. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Not wasting no time, let's start the story.
I'm leaving the village tonight. The older shinobi stopped going over his notes to glance up at the sound of a voice he had grown so accustomed to hearing. His student was standing in the shadows, close to the room's lone window, which he had rented for the night. He was shocked that he hadn't noticed his entrance into the room until the young man had finished speaking, as he had forgotten how adept his student had become at slipping in and out of places. With a heavy sigh, he put his notes down and swiftly evaluated the young shinobi. He waited for the young man to confirm what he already knew, saying, Just what do you mean by leaving the village? I'm certain you wouldn't sneak into my room in the middle of the night simply to inform me of your latest mission, so? The shadowed shinobi stepped forward, revealing his battle-weary figure in his all-too-familiar orange jumpsuit in the light of the single lamp. A normally cheerful, if frequently immature, young man. Naruto Uzumaki now stood in front of Jiraiya with a look that could only be described as resentful and aloof. You know what I mean, Jiraiya-sama. Even his voice had changed to one of coldness and detachment. Two adjectives that no one would ever think to use to characterize the young man in front of him. Jiraiya's gaze followed the blue headband that had once been proudly placed on the boy's forehead as it clattered onto the table in front of him. However, if you truly need me to spell it out for you. The only answer the Toad Sage felt was required at the moment was, why? He studied the article, then looked back at his student's face while he held the discarded forehead protector in his fist. Jiraiya had never seen this side of Naruto before and was not sure how to deal with him. I can't remain in this village. Correction. I won't remain in this village. A person can only take being told they are something so many times before they start to believe it, Naruto grumbled. The Toad Sage decided to ignore Naruto's hateful tone. A low voice said, You know what consequences a choice such as this will bring, Jiraiya said after a brief moment of silence. He asked, Are you sure you are making the right decision? With narrowed eyes, Naruto responded, It is the decision I will stand by. Ah yes, you're Nindo, though I believe you misunderstood me. I meant, are you sure you're making the right decision in telling me this? Jiraiya's eyes took on a hard glint as he stared down the 13-year-old in front of him, seemingly dismissing the boy's statement as unimportant. In defiance, Naruto held up his head and said, I think so, yes. If I told Kakashi-sensei, he would immediately report me to Tsunade-sama, while I believe you would not. Jiraiya sighs and then says, I will give you 5 days, a week at most. Before I tell her about this conversation, you will become a missing nin and you will be hunted. This you well know. Jiraiya appeared to think about Naruto's remarks and assess whether the boy's trust was warranted before answering, If you need me, send word through the toads. If I need you, I'll be dead before I could send such a message, Naruto said with a resigned shake of his head. As Jiraiya stared at the young man in front of him, his head jerked backwards as if it had been struck. He wondered what could have happened to bring him to this low point in his life. Naruto retreated into the room's shadows and vanished out the window before the two could exchange another word. Jiraiya appeared to deflate as a sorrowful sigh seemed to fill the room. He knew that whatever had happened was something Naruto would always remember, particularly if it was such a horrible incident that it would push the happy blonde who aspired to be Hokage to live as a missing nin. He had noticed a previously unheard of coldness in Naruto, which he hoped would not overwhelm the young man. Jiraiya was the only one who was aware that Naruto was far more skilled as a shinobi than everyone thought he was. He turned away from the window and gazed at the long forehead protector, hoping that Naruto would not be apprehended as a missing nin. Even though he was devoted to Konohagakure, he didn't want the boy to suffer because he wanted to live outside the village. After 8 years once more, she had been kidnapped. Hinata Hyuga woke up with the realization that she was no longer in the cozy bed of the expensive room her father had reserved for her at the Sunagakure Inn. The obvious absence of a bed beneath her served as her first clue, followed by the overwhelming darkness and earthy odor that enveloped her. She was aware that her kunoichi abilities were lacking. But how could she have been kidnapped from her bed with such ease? She silently activated her Byakugan and looked around, discovering that she was alone in what looked to be a dome-shaped room without a door or windows. When she tried to sit up, she realized that she could be kidnapped from her bed. The lingering effects of the drug made her head hurt and her body feel heavy. When she finally managed to pull herself upright, she thought, probably a drugged senbon. Stupid people. How many times in my life will I wake up and find I've been kidnapped? The fact that she was still wearing the nightgown she had put on before bed made her wonder if she should be relieved. She couldn't have planned to dress more appropriately for the role of kidnapped victim, so it didn't exactly offer a cover of modesty. Hinata detested this part of Hyuga life. and she detested the fact that she had given in to her father's pressure to leave the life of a kunoichi 8 years prior. She might have been better able to avoid a situation like this if she hadn't, but she needed to concentrate today and not be sidetracked by what ifs. So that was a problem for another day. I will save myself even though I may not have stopped this from happening. As she dragged herself to the closest wall to rest while she waited for the last of the drug to wear off, her frustration with the situation grew. The wall was composed of earth, and as she concentrated more intently on what she could see, she became aware that she was in a system of caves. More precisely, inside one of the system's caverns, and from what her talented eyes could see, there was no escape. How did they enter this place with me? By concentrating on the area outside her cave, she managed to spot 2 men 150 feet away who were moving slowly in her direction. She could tell by the way they were going that, if they didn't completely pass her by, they would be approaching the other side of the cave from where she was sitting. As her body protested her struggles to stand, she thought, please, let them pass me by. A wave of dizziness nearly knocked her down, and she threw out one arm to catch herself on the wall. Hinata waited for the dizziness to subside before trying to walk. Hinata started to move toward the other side of the cave, keeping a close eye on the 2 approaching figures to determine how much time she would have. The process was neither quick nor simple, and she found herself grateful that the kidnappers didn't seem to be in a rush. As she swiftly arrived at the other side of the cave, she started to run her fingers over the wall in the hopes of spotting an escape route or something her eyes were blind to. Before she heard a loud rumbling, she had barely had time to realize that she was actually sealed in. A portion of the wall 4 feet away started to gradually move to the side, and pieces of rock started to fall all around her as she turned off her Byakugan, listened to the men's conversation, and waited for the right moment to strike. She thought, of course, an Earth-style user. One of the men said lecherously, you know they only want her eyes and there are a lot of things we could do to her that won't involve her eyes one bit, as the wall section kept moving. I mean, did you see that body? I can't wait to have a little fun with that. As Hinata considered what these men were pursuing and not just her eyes, but also the use of her body, her anger grew. She would sooner die than allow one of these men to touch her, so she would not be left to their mercy. Goru, I don't think we should mess with her yet, at least not until we are in a more secure location. The report from Jun said Ronin is tracking us. While waiting for them both to enter the opening, Hinata pressed as close to the wall as she could because she could see light coming from a flashlight one of them was carrying. Goru, who was entering the cave, declared, Oi, Daichi, you worry too much. Ronin tracking us, huh? The guy doesn't exist. As he started to sweep the flashlight around the open area, the tall, plump figure of the man almost made Hinata gag. Hey, where the hell is she? She asked. The other man, who was short and disheveled and appeared to be Goru's complete opposite, hurried up beside him. There's no way she could have gotten out. The dossier said she was a weak former kunoichi with no earth affinity. Palm heel strike was Hinata's final move. She hit Goru between the shoulder blades and then raised her leg to give him the hardest kick possible into his partner. She turned to flee the cave without looking to see the consequences of her actions. She was confident she could find her way out because her Byakugan had given her the layout of the cave system. Prior to being tripped by one of the men, who was a skilled kunoichi, she was able to move into a roll with ease and keep moving forward as soon as she heard the words, Sweden. Sweden. A water-made whip whirled around her neck, yanking her off her feet before slamming her hard onto her back as she fought to avoid being dragged back to the men and to get the coil off her neck. The whip kept getting tighter. She kicked out in desperation, unable to breathe, and her vision started to blur. She viciously tried to kick any part of her body that was not hers that she could reach as the men drew closer, keeping the whip taut on her neck as Daichi stepped forward to strike the left side of her face with a bone-shattering blow. Her vision grew blurry and her struggles slowed. She heard a blast and felt the cave tremble, and she was rapidly losing her strength. Both men appeared startled and yet afraid of what might be happening, as they jerked away from the woman a little. Ronin was the only word Daichi uttered in terror before the water whip suddenly relaxed around her neck and she began to gasp for air with a Doden. Dorya, Heki. Goru sealed her back in the cave after grabbing a fistful of her hair. She tried desperately to get her throat to function properly, but she was so weak that all she could do was lie there and cough. Her recovering, drugged body hadn't felt so beaten in years, and the lack of oxygen hadn't helped. She thought to herself, I can't even get away from those two, so I really need to start training again. This is pathetic. As the cave's earth continued to rumble and tremble intermittently, rocks started to fall on and around her. She was aware that her kidnappers were being attacked even before she activated her Byakugan. The thought of what might have happened made her shudder. Unless someone out there is a Hyuga, they'll never know I'm here. It's not much of a rescue, but at least I won't die having suffered the advances of those two. She started to worry that the cave would collapse on her and turn into her grave, and it started to tremble more violently as she fought to stand again. She prayed, "Please, let it be quick." Hinata tried to adopt her old fighting stance, braced for the worst, as the cave wall started to shift once more. Doten. Rock Bullet Jutsu was performed by Goru as he hurried in, and she saw that he was trembling in fear, obviously ready for any attack on her part. Hinata's newly recovered breath was sucked out of her lungs when a big rock crashed into her, flinging her against the wall behind her. As Goru walked toward her, she collapsed to her hands and knees, gasping for air once more. "Get up, you bitch," he growled. "Get up. He's after you, so you'll be my ticket out of here." Before he could move her another foot, a shadow passed over them. He was grabbing a handful of her hair once more and trying to drag her out of the room. Goru let her hair fall loose and spun wildly in the direction of the cavern's entrance, finally taking a deep breath. Hinata looked up from where she was lying on the floor to see the scariest thing she had ever seen. Ronin, the most wanted man in all the allied countries, stood at the cave's entrance. Despite never having seen him in person, she was familiar with him thanks to his well-known appearance. It was said that the man could be covered in blood and no one would ever notice because of his distinctive red shirt and pants, which were so deep red with the black mask covering his face from his neck to just below the coldest pair of blue eyes she had ever seen. He wore a dark coat that was darker than night. It couldn't be anyone else, and Goru was obviously aware of this as he attempted to project some confidence in the face of the most famous and accomplished murderer in history. Doten. Doria saw was all Hinata could hear as Goro performed a seal, and then a sharp spear of earth emerged from the ground and pierced her left shoulder. She let out a painful scream as the spear went through her shoulder and out the other side. Goro had managed to pin her in place, and she tried to keep her cries of pain to herself and concentrate on shattering the spear to break free. Ronin hadn't even responded when the woman was impaled. His gaze had never left Goru's face. He was so focused on her kidnapper that it was as if she didn't exist at all. "I'm not afraid of you," Goru spat at the lone man who hadn't taken a single step into the cavern in an attempt to bluff his way out of the situation. Ronin appeared to be nearly made of stone because he showed no signs of movement, and his hands, which were covered in fingerless black gloves, hung loosely at his sides. Hinata felt a sudden rush of air as Goru raised his hands to perform another seal, and at the same moment, something warm and moist splashed onto her right side. With tears in her eyes, Hinata looked up to see Ronin standing next to Goru, who now had a kunai through his neck. When she had first seen Ronin at the cave's entrance, he had had a chilly, almost an interesting expression in his eyes as the dead man fell over Hinata's legs. Ronin gave the kunai a twist and jerked it out of Goru's neck without taking her eyes off the menacing figure above her. She fought to lift the weight and break free from the earth spear. He knelt down and gave her a calculating assessment before effortlessly shattering the spear that had so successfully imprisoned her with one hand. Goru had said that someone was here for her, and she tried to run away from him, thinking he was there to kill her. Ronin just stood there, dragging her healthy arm over his shoulder. Then he scooped her squirming body into his arms and strode out of the cavern. Hinata stopped fighting and started to question whether this infamous murderer was actually saving her as he turned right and headed down an open tunnel. Even more rocks and dirt started to fall than during the attack, causing the cave to tremble violently. They turned a corner and discovered another individual clad black. "We need to hurry. You killed the Earth-style user, didn't you? Of course you did. The network of caves is collapsing. It was his jutsu that created them, and now that he's dead, well, I'm sure you can guess what's beginning to happen. Hey, nice piece of ass you've scooped up." The cave literally collapsed around them, with huge pieces of earth falling just feet away, and Hinata was astounded that this man was talking so casually to the notorious murderer. Ronin pointed in the direction of the exit and reached out to hit the other man upside his head without even jostling Hinata. The other man just gave a nod and sprinted for the door. After putting his arm beneath her once more, Ronin drew her close and started to follow his partner. Hinata was never jostled while he was running. Even though pieces of the earth were practically falling on them, he took care to keep her safe and secure in his arms. He turned to make sure his body took the brunt of the impact. Even though a big boulder made him stumble hard into the wall, she was perplexed by the situation she appeared to be in, despite the danger all around her. Hinata had to force her eyes shut as they acclimatized to the intense afternoon sun before she could rush out of the caverns as it finally collapsed in on itself as his partner drew closer. Ronin stepped forward to place her next to a tree. Hinata regarded the two men with suspicion, not believing they would not murder her or, worse, rape her. As Hinata swung her right palm forward, aiming to strike the tenketsu points in his forearm while deflecting a possible blow, Ronin reached out to rip the fabric of her nightgown away from her injured shoulder. He grabbed her wrist and held it away from him before she could make contact. "Calm down," he said in a low growl. "Unless you want the wound to keep bleeding, I'm checking it." Hinata froze. It was too much for her to process that maybe he really did intend to help her. Ronin's partner attracted her attention from 2 feet behind him. Hey lady, if you aren't dead already then he's not going to kill you, just settle down and let us do what we can for that shoulder, she said. She made an effort to observe them both and nodded subtly that she would settle down. As advised, Ronan swiftly freed her wrist and proceeded with his initial plan to rip the cloth from her shoulder and examine the injury. As he examined the wound and tore fabric from the bottom of her gown to wrap around her shoulder, she let out a gasp of agony. The notorious assassin simply said, "She'll live," and turned his back on her. Still unable to calm herself, Hinata watched the man in the mask walk away from her. The fact that Ronan had just saved her stunned her. No one who opposed him lived. According to the rumors that surrounded his name, he had never saved anyone before. As far as she knew, what made him save me? Then? She moved so that she was as close to the tree as she could be. Drawing the knee of the other leg close to her torso and tucking one foot under her, she didn't really feel like she could move fast in her current state, but she did this in case she needed to stand up quickly. Details that she had previously missed were glaringly obvious. Naturally, those particulars had not mattered when her primary concerns had been survival and escape. The funny thing about adrenaline was that it could make you stronger and faster when you were in danger, but it also had the bad habit of obstructing your ability to see important information. It became evident as the adrenaline rush subsided that almost every part of her body hurt and that the lightheadedness she had experienced when she woke up had only gotten worse. When will I be able to stop feeling lightheaded today? She knew the answer to her question as she turned her gaze back to her shoulder and saw that the fabric of her gown was rapidly getting soaked in blood. She looked down to see that her pale cream gown, which had not offered much cover previously, was now unquestionably failing to do so. Now that the material had been torn to make a makeshift bandage, it barely covered her butt, even though it had fallen to mid-thigh. In addition, the gown was sheer and the material now clung damply to her torso because of the bloody hole in her left shoulder. Unfortunately, Hinata shuddered at the source of the blood on her right side. Neither the death of Goru nor the manner of its death was something she regretted. Rather, she lamented the fact that she had to endure the vile man's blood on her body until she could change. Thoughts of modesty and Goru's blood were dismissed in her mind because they were insignificant compared to the possible danger that was only a few feet away. With her head cocked downward, Hinata lifted her eyes to try to surreptitiously observe both men. She noted that Ronan was tall, perhaps 6 feet at 5 feet 3 inches. He would appear to be much taller than she was. She would have to be careful to stay out of that range or move fast enough to land her blows before retreating a safe distance, because this would give him more reach in a fight between the two. She had realized as he had carried her that he was obviously well-muscled. Naturally, she had noticed his blue eyes resting above his mask right away. It was impossible to miss them because they were icy and uncaring, promising death to anyone who dared to look at them. She hadn't previously noticed that the man had blonde hair that reached just past his jacket collar, but that some of it stood up at strange angles as if it were attempting to get out of his head in any way. Since his face was so ugly, she pondered whether this assassin wore a mask, which would explain why his hair would want to fall out of his head. She thought it would be a shame to waste a body like his on a hideous face. If that were the case, it doesn't matter what his face looks like. It won't matter when he kills me. It wouldn't make a difference if he had warts or bucktooth. She made an effort to control her curiosity about the appearance of a man she ought to despise. Little was visible through the heavy coat and mask he wore, so she was unable to gather any more pertinent information. She hated hired killers, depraved men whose morals changed according to the amount of money they received. However, she was unable to harbor much animosity toward the man who had saved her life. He literally had a body to die for, she had to admit based on what she could see. But the 100 million Ryo question was, who was he? Yes, the man in front of her had a sizable bingo book bounty. Someone might make a little fortune if they knew even the smallest detail about who he was. Even though she couldn't help but be curious about him, she could see why he would be adamant about hiding his identity. By turning her attention to his partner, she was able to learn the information she needed about the more talkative man, who seemed unconcerned with hiding his identity. Hinata estimated that he was about 5 feet 6 or 7 inches, shorter than Ronan by a few inches. Because of their relatively small height difference, she wouldn't have to worry too much about his reach in a fight. He was also smaller than his legendary partner, but he was muscular with dark brown eyes and brown hair that was noticeably more subdued than his partner's. He actually appeared to be almost the complete opposite of Ronan. His hair barely reached his collar. Unlike his partner, he didn't have a jacket and wore all black. As the effects of blood loss started to rush over her, Hinata kept watching them. She was struggling to maintain her vigilance. She was 5 feet away from the two men, but she was unable to hear their voices or even understand what they were saying. Maybe to keep her in the back of his mind at all times, Ronan stood like a statue with his left side facing her. Even in my condition, he won't give his back to a potential threat, she said. Although his arms hung loosely by his sides, she occasionally saw his fingers flex as if they were about to make a fist. Although it was difficult to tell because of his mask, His partner appeared to be speaking all the time. She inhaled deeply, bracing herself for any possibility that they might be discussing how to murder me. He knew going into this job that the kidnapped victim was a Hyuga, but did it have to be her? Ronan was shocked by his bad luck. His chest had ached from memories of the past that should have been forgotten when he saw Hinata inside that cave. Too many years had gone by, and he had changed. Even the emotion he experienced upon seeing her again was brief before he returned to his normal state of serene detachment because he had grown so cold inside. Even with that detachment, it had been hard to remain silent when Goro pinned her to the ground with his earth spear jutsu. He had thought himself immune to such things after years of hearing different screams and gasps of pain or mercy in his line of work, but when the spear hit her shoulder, he couldn't bear her cries of agony. Examining her once more while Takeshi went on one of his frequent tirades, he felt rage try to rise within him at the sight of her battered and bruised body. He was troubled by the idea of her suffering such a great deal of abuse because she had always been kind and soft-spoken and had never been cruel to anyone, especially him. Hinata was not deserving of such treatment. She ought to have been safe in her family's embrace, shielded by the mighty Hyuga clan and their watchful gaze. The fact that two fools like Goro and Daichi had taken her from her room in the middle of the night intrigued him. Takeshi snapped his fingers close to Ronan's face and said, "Yo, you listening to me?" Hinata was visibly agitated by a gesture and obviously anticipated a violent response from him. He simply raised an eyebrow in a gesture that told the younger man, "Do you really think I am capable of being that oblivious?" As he turned to face Takeshi with a blank expression, "Never do that again." Takeshi simply shrugged, indifferent to the nonverbal cues that he had obviously picked up on. When Takeshi said, "Look, I know we never back out of a job, but I say we've done our good deed. She's alive with her eyes still intact. Let's just leave her here." She did so quietly once more. Most of the time, Takeshi was able to discern every subtlety of his personality and moods even though he was wearing a mask and remained silently stoic. It was evidence of their friendship and the years they had spent together. "I see the way you're looking at her, and this can only lead to trouble." During a job, Ronan typically made an effort to talk as little as possible because, to be honest, he didn't feel the need to talk to people he intended to kill or might kill in the future. However, he decided to make an exception on this one for apparent reasons. All he said as he gestured toward the Hyuga heiress was, "Go over there." Since his voice had changed in many ways over the years, it was low and rough to his ears as usual. Ronan reflected on the scar he had across his neck, which he believed was the result of a bad choice he made about a woman. One would think he would have learned his lesson by now. He watched with mild amusement as Takeshi let out an exaggerated sigh and turned to follow instructions, mercilessly pushing those thoughts to the back of his mind and slamming a door on them. She leapt to her feet, ready to attack, before he could get within 3 feet of the kind-looking creature. Ronan hurried between them and glared down at Hinata, not wanting Takeshi to harm her out of instinct derived from his training. But as he watched her eyes roll to the back of her head before she passed out, he realized that his intervention didn't seem necessary before she could hit the ground. Ronan quickly gathered her into his arms. Her captor's drugs and the blood loss had obviously taken their toll. He took off his coat and draped it over her, gently laying her down. The astute mouth of Takeshi interrupted, "Be careful now. One might confuse you for a gentleman." Ronan retaliated angrily, saying, "Shut up, before I decide I'm tired of your constant nagging. I swear you're worse than a woman." Since Hinata was unconscious, he felt free to talk to Takeshi. Takeshi only said, yeah. In response he rushed forward to seize Hinata's gown by the neck, but Ronan grabbed both of his hands by the wrist. He looked up, unfazed, and asked, What are you doing?" Ronan was aware that the Hyuga's upper body would need to be stripped in order to appropriately dress the hole, which was 1 inch in diameter and ran through her shoulder. He felt somewhat ashamed for not attempting to allay her fear after witnessing the level of fear she had shown when Takeshi approached. "Give me the kit, I'll do it," Takeshi started to say, hoping for a quick peek. "Boss, I know it's been a while since yo." But Ronan interrupted him by giving him another hard slap on the head. Takeshi turned to retrieve the medical supply kit from the pouch he carried at his lower back without remarking or responding. "You knew her, didn't you? From before you left?" Ronan grabbed the kit from him and started to collect the bandages and ointments he would need without looking up. He said, "Go scout the area." Even with Takeshi, he hadn't wanted to go back down that path. "Sometimes I don't know why I'm your friend, Naruto," Takeshi said, his expression hardening from that of a joker to that of a serious assassin. He then hurried off to follow instructions. He sighed in the hopes that it would help him relax. Left alone with the unconscious Hinata, he couldn't regret the years he'd known Takeshi, but it was a mistake and a liability to let someone know who he really was despite being aware of the possibility of being apprehended and subjected to torture in order to obtain information about him. His partner showed no concern. The material of her gown clung to her body, giving Naruto an alluring sight as he shifted his jacket to just below her breasts. Knowing that he would need to take off the garment in order to treat her shoulder, he found it difficult to maintain his objectivity with a swift motion. He ripped the fabric off, exposing her breasts so cami they had the palest pink nipples at the tip and were flawlessly creamy white as his body began to harden at the sight. He squeezed his eyes shut after taking another deep breath. He opened his eyes and focused on the bleeding hole in her shoulder. Before using a topical ointment, he tried to remove as much blood as he could from the area surrounding the wound. Unfortunately, when he sat her up to administer the same treatment to the other side of the wound, on her back, he had to put up with the sensation of those flawless breasts pressing against his forearm. By the time he started carefully applying gauze pads to both sides of the wound and wrapped the bandage around her shoulder and then across her chest to keep the gauze in place, his breathing was labored after the bandage was finished. He found it difficult to slide her arms into his jacket without showing more of her body. He didn't need the extra thoughts that such an image would give him, so he planned to leave the lower portion of her gown still draped around her hips. He covered her body at last and gently placed her back down, then started to pace and wait for Takeshi to come back, feeling that he would suffocate if he didn't remove his mask. He wandered over to the tree Hinata had previously leant against. He tried to regain his usual cool, collected manner by rubbing one hand across his face and over the nape of his neck. By the time Takeshi returned, he was leaning against the tree with his arms and feet crossed in a fictitious relaxed stance, the mask back in place. "Well," he asked. "There's no one around, but we should get moving, so let's wake her ass up." To stop Takeshi, Naruto extended his hand and said, "No, let her rest. I'll carry her to a safer location." "You're attracted to her," was not so much a question as a declaration. His words were dry. "I'm not blind or dead, yet," he said. "Can you honestly tell me you aren't attracted to her?" As Naruto snarled at him, Takeshi crossed his arms over his chest and said, "No, I sure can't. I told you she's a hot piece of ass. One I wouldn't mind having under, over, or in front of me for a few hours. But I know you. You're never this gentle or considerate." He pinned Naruto with a glare, using the adjectives as if they were completely offensive to him. He got down from the tree to pick up Hinata, making sure his jacket still covered her. "She's obviously beautiful. It's lust and nothing more. Trust me, it'll pass." "You sure it will?" Takeshi asked, glancing sharply between the girl's unconscious body in his arms and Naruto's face. In response, he turned to jump into the trees, saying, "We're done here," allowing them to leave the area and move to a safer spot. He didn't recall her being so small, but he hadn't been much taller than her before leaving the village, so holding her in his arms again was distracting now. If he wasn't careful, he thought he could easily crush her in his arms. Naruto started doing something he usually avoided, letting memories of his time in the village come to the surface. He always thought she was beautiful and graceful back then, and he felt compelled to shield her from the harsher realities of their world because of her gentle nature. However, he had to acknowledge that she now had the beauty that had only been suggested by her younger appearance. As he looked down to make sure she was still unconscious, she had allowed her dark indigo hair to grow out, which only served to accentuate her delicate face's features. After several hours of driving, Naruto and Takeshi stopped in a tiny clearing encircled by so many trees that they knew it would be difficult to find them after the sunset. As Takeshi calmed down and flashed away, Naruto said, "This should be a good enough spot for now. I'll scout the area just in case. Set up camp and keep your distance from her. Remember, she's a gentle fist user, so don't drop your guard." Takeshi shook his head, behaving as though we had just met. "I have a bad feeling about this job," he thought, casting a worried glance in the direction where his friend had vanished. "He knows I never let my guard down." Hinata woke up to strange surroundings for the second time in what she hoped was still the same day. Wonderful. This is turning into a routine. However, this time didn't seem as ominous because she woke up outside in the daylight. Lying on a bedroll that brought back memories of her time as a village genin, she felt a weight bearing down on her as she lay on her right side. Hinata tried to keep her breathing steady, not knowing what the weight was or what she would find when she opened her eyes. Her heart jumped in terror and then seemed to get stuck in her throat as she remembered everything that had happened, especially Ronin. She had to determine what was happening, but before she could take any action, a voice called out to her. She assumed that voice belonged to Ronin's partner, saying, "You're safe. So there's no need to pretend to sleep or plot some ill-conceived escape." She took a deep breath and opened her eyes while sitting up, deciding to confront the situation head-on. She soon realized that she was wearing Ronin's coat, a long black one that, based on its weight, was lined with armor that would help block all but the sharpest blades. Because the extra protection outweighed the loss of speed and agility, suits of armor became obsolete shinobi-style flak vests, which allow for greater maneuverability, were preferred. This man must therefore be strong enough to make sure that wearing a full armored coat, even one that is lightweighted, does not impair his movement. Grasping the edges of the coat together, she turned to face the direction the voice had come from and discovered Ronan's partner essentially relaxing against a tree. Ronan himself was nowhere to be seen, according to a quick scan of the surroundings. "How's your shoulder?" she asked, turning back to the man in front of her. His dark brown eyes had a warmth to them that Ronan's did not have, giving the impression that he genuinely cared. Before she could reply, he added, "Ronan took care of it while you were out." Takeshi had to confess that he was interested to see how she would respond. He wasn't interested in her shoulder's condition. He could have guessed it. "What do you think about Ronan stripping you down?" "I'm sure it hurts like hell." Takeshi wasn't a bad guy, but he enjoyed making other people feel uncomfortable and embarrassed. He said, "I will not think about that man, with that deadly aura, seeing me naked," but Hinata decided to ignore him. No, it won't work. She was afraid that if she did, her face would show what was on her mind, or worse, she would faint once more. "I believe I've accomplished enough for today." She felt as if she had been speaking into a glass ceiling when she asked, "Where are we?" But she needed answers. She was aware that the trees were denser here, there was no rubble, and they were no longer outside the network of caverns from which they had barely escaped. "The where isn't important," the man replied with a shrug. "Just know that you're safe for the moment and will be back in soon now that you're finally awake." Hyuga-san. She was troubled by the question, "Why did you save me?" He took a moment to let the realization sink in. "First, let me catch you up on a few things. You've been missing for 36 hours, he said. She whispered in confusion, "I thought I'd only been gone 12, maybe 14. "Yeah, those two dumb shits decided to keep you drugged to make traveling easier. Clearly they misjudged the dosage, judging by your physical state," he said with a wink. "It didn't do them much good though. They were slow as hell. We caught up to you easily." "Why would two assassins be sent on a rescue mission?" she interrupted him. "Actually, it wasn't a rescue mission, it was a recovery mission. Your absence was quickly discovered and we were hired by the Hyuga clan to recover you dead or alive, by any means necessary," he said without stopping to clear his throat. Hinata was aware of the clear distinction between a recovery mission and a rescue mission. Since they had her body to return for their pay, these men genuinely didn't care if they had come too late to save her life. She was once again repulsed by assassins. Finding out that her own clan had only cared about her return, not her survival, further unsettled her. She sighed sorrowfully before turning back to the odd man, saying, "I'm not sure I want to go back to Suna and what's waiting there for me. I know the other one is Ronan, so who are you? You haven't heard of me. Wow, everyone knows the big, bad, and evil, but no one ever remembers poor Takeshi." He put his hand to his chest in a mocking gesture of pain. "That hurts, truly," he replied dryly, the corners of his lips quirking at his own sarcasm. He got to his feet, pulled out a dark bundle of cloth, and tossed it to Hinata. "Here. I thought you might feel more comfortable if you weren't traipsing around in just my partner's jacket." As the package fell into Hinata's lap, she grudgingly murmured, "Thank you. Yeah, I don't do so well with gratitude, and it's clear you don't like being beholden to someone like me, so walk through that stand of trees 14 yards and you'll find a stream. You can clean up a bit and change." He was pointing to her right, and realized that trying to flee would be pointless and would only make your suffering worse. "Where's Ronan?" she asked, standing shakily and clutching the bundle of clothes in her right hand. "Are you afraid you'll be giving him a peep show?" Takeshi said with a sincere smile that made him seem even less likely to be an assassin. "You're not his type, Hyuga-san, so calm down." She inhaled deeply once more in an effort to control her feelings of embarrassment and anger. She mentally recited the mantra her father had instilled in her. One must always be in control. Acting out emotionally is improper and hinders logical reasoning. After regaining a tenuous grip on her emotions, she went to clean up and get dressed. Byakugan Hinata found the stream with ease, following Takeshi's instructions, and she made sure no one was around before deactivating her Kekkei Genkai and lowering the borrowed coat off her shoulders, stopping to check the bandagea, which, I must say, he did a good job bandaging for an assassina, and continuing to examine her body. She saw that her gown, I should just call this a rag after Tadea, was barely hanging onto her hips. She stepped out of the rag, which had been her nightgown, and continued to lower the jacket until she sensed someone behind her. She stooped to close his coat around her after turning to see the long-missing Ronan staring at her with a heated expression. She had previously thought his eyes were incapable of showing emotion, but now the way he was staring at her. Hinata felt warmth spread through her stomach as she stared into Ronan's eyes, thinking, "Oh, there I go, mentally cringing. What is wrong with me? I should not be blushing because some assassin is eyeballing me like I'm his favorite snack." She had to admit that without his coat on, she could see more of his lean build. The mask only added a mysterious quality that was somehow captivating. Remember that he's probably buck-toothed and wart-faced. Oh, but what a waste that would be. As if it were the only apology he would give for essentially witnessing her nude, he took 2 steps away from her and raised his hands in a supplicating manner before saying, "I was told you were ready to travel again." "Clearly I am not," she hesitated, then asked, "May I go on?" She grimaced as she realized that rather than being the subliminal cue to leave that she had intended, that sentence could be interpreted as an invitation to let him observe her transformation. Ronan closed his eyes for a moment and shook his head almost imperceptibly before turning and walking away toward the camp. "This cannot be good for me after losing so much blood. I can't believe I said that. How humiliating. Why am I blushing? I haven't blushed in years." Hinata felt herself blushing furiously over her slip of the tongue. She watched Ronan walk away and tried to make the blood in her face return to the rest of her body. She was saddened as she thought about the last time she had blushed like this. "Naruto, where have you gone?" As she stared at the spot where Ronan had vanished into the trees, she thought about his blue eyes and blonde hair, which were similar to Naruto's but far too cold. In the past, every boy with blue eyes and blonde hair had made her heart hurt because she was worried about where her love had gone. If she had met Ronan years ago, she might have thought even Hopeta that he was actually Naruto, but she knew better. Her Naruto-kun could never have turned into the ruthless killer known as Ronan in the elemental nations. She made sure he had actually left by activating her Byakugan once more. "Wait, I had just checked the area, so how did he get here so quickly without me noticing his approach? His speed must be a contributing factor in his longevity and reputation." Hinata decided to leave the coat on until the very last minute, so she turned back to face the men. She put on a pair of pants that she had to roll up at the waist multiple times to keep them from falling off, thinking, "Yeah, that's exactly what I need, to give them both a peep show this time." Fortunately, the pants stopped at her ankles, so it was obvious that these were Takeshi's. She pulled her arms out of the coat's sleeves, hunching slightly so it would hang on her, and then hunched even more to painfully and carefully fit her head through the neck hole. Standing up, she let the jacket slip off while pulling the shirt down. "I must still be woozy from everything," she said, wincing as she pushed her hair out of her face and found a nasty bruise from the hit Daichi had delivered. "There's no way that man, or any man, could look at me with desire in his eyes." She sighed dejectedly, remembering the man she would have loved to have looked at her in such a way, and how it seemed as though he'd never truly seen her. It's time to set these thoughts aside and concentrate on the present, on returning to Suna as unharmed as possible, or at least as unharmed as I already am. 20 minutes prior they're torturing me. Naruto's body was so hard that it had never been so difficult for him to leap through the trees, and he had been so distracted that a tree branch had almost taken his head. Thoughts of Hinata's perfect breasts had tormented him as he'd carried her in his arms away from the collapsed caves. Her skin had been so soft, and he'd been tempted to lean down and kiss those little pink nipples, but his body was so hard that it had been so much worse naturally. This led to Takeshi making fun of him. Even though Takeshi was a huge source of annoyance, he also provided some solace to Naruto because he was not as heartless and cold as Naruto had become despite being a professional death dealer. Takeshi was able to enjoy life and find humor, which he feared would fade if he continued this way of life for much longer than it had for him. For Naruto, that ability had started to wane long before he had started taking lives for financial gain. Thoughts of Hinata, who had always been the embodiment of gentleness and now, in his opinion, also personified beauty, continued to divert his attention as he searched the area around their camp. Having learned the hard way that no one was innocent and that people could be cruel, he scoffed out loud at his thoughts as his mood shifted from reverent and distracted to bitter. He would not allow himself to think of the Hyuga in this way any longer. She is a stranger to Ronin, and I will act accordingly. She is just another job, and we will take her back, and I will never see her again. He had sensed the presence coming for some time, and now that it had finally come, his annoyance only grew. His glare would make most men urinate when they turned to face the little toad. Go tell him to get over this." The only response from the toad was a loud croak before it vanished in a cloud of smoke as he growled viciously. Jiraiya used to send out a mass network of toads once a month in the hopes of finding Naruto, and when a toad had something to report, it would poof back to Mount Myoboku. This was his old sensei's way of keeping an eye on him, and at first he would ignore the toads when they found him because he had been far too angry in the first few months to respond. Later, he started sending the toads brief messages that would not reveal any details, and when the toads would poof away, Naruto knew it was time to leave a location. The toads didn't always find him, and as the years went by, he became increasingly irate each time he was located, sending messages telling the toad sage to leave him alone. It doesn't always make sense to me either. Years ago, Takeshi had asked him why he didn't simply kill the toads to keep his location secret while sending Jiraiya a very moving message. He had given Takeshi an explanation based on the toad's innocence, but the young man had been perplexed that he could kill a toad for money but wouldn't kill a toad to keep his location secret. 13 minutes prior he was worried about the reaction if the toad had seen Hinata and had been able to inform Jiraiya of her presence, but he knew before he entered the camp that she wasn't there, which didn't help his foul mood. Swiftly approaching Takeshi, his body language betraying his malevolent intent, he inquired, "Where is she?" Takeshi, who had been waiting for Naruto to return for this exact moment, was still relaxing at the base of a tree and seemed utterly unaware of his rage. "Calm down, she changed after I lent her some clothes, and she's now at the stream. Is everything alright?" "A toad," was Naruto's only answer. "Gosh. I guess we're pulling an all-nighter on this one," Takeshi said as he hurried to his feet and started packing up their equipment. After turning to face the stream, Naruto nodded abruptly and said, "What are you waiting for?" With his back to Takeshi, he failed to notice the sly smile on his face. "As good as she can be in her condition. She is a good travel companion, so let's get out of here and go get her." Takeshi couldn't help but shake his head as Naruto left, picturing the Hyuga heiress's humiliation and his friend's annoyance at his error. Now it had been so difficult to resist the urge to go to Hinata and make the thoughts in his head a reality. He drew a deep breath of relief as he stepped away from her, picturing her lithe body in his coat. Her breasts not the only perfect part of her body, her toned legs leading up to her hips that he could imagine gripping as he pulled her tight against him, making her scream in ecstasy. "I'll fail this job if this keeps up. Damn that Takeshi. He set me up." Naruto sulked as he trudged back to the camp. Trying to push through the pain of his tightening pants, he moaned in frustration as he thought about his jacket and how it had been kissing and touching her pale creamy skin. He knew it would carry her scent when he got it back, a constant reminder that she'd been naked in it. Naruto's annoyance flared as he entered the tiny clearing where Takeshi had already packed everything away. "Did you get a good show?" Takeshi asked Naruto, grinning, as she stood leaning against a tree. "Or did you arrive too late?" Naruto moved so fast it seemed as though a kunai came out of nowhere to fly at his head. Takeshi tilted his head slightly to the left, allowing the kunai to graze his cheek and embed into the tree. He could have avoided it entirely, but he knew he deserved some punishment for that nasty trick. He wasn't without his own, albeit twisted, sense of right and wrong. Ignoring the light trickle of blood from the small scratch, he shrugged. "I guess you were too late." "Prick, it's not funny." As Hinata emerged from the trees, his jacket folded over her arms, he turned to look at her and thought how adorable she looked in the too large clothing. She threw the jacket to him with her uninjured right arm without even looking at him, and he caught it with one hand and took a deep breath, hoping to strengthen his resolve to treat her like any other job. As Ronin would usually do. Unfortunately, he could smell her scent coming off the material in his hands. It was a faint lilac scent and something that was all hers, and it would haunt him for a long time. He walked over to Takeshi's pack and picked up a bento box. "What are you doing?" "Hello. I had that saved." A glare had Takeshi throwing his hands up. "Fine." He held out the box to Hinata, observing every aspect of her face while attempting to project an image of his usual stoicism. When she finally raised her eyes to meet his, Naruto saw mistrust and possibly hatred, which made him feel detached once more because it reminded him of who he had become rather than who he had once been. Hinata just kept staring at him and the bento box that was offered. She didn't trust that they hadn't poisoned it, but if killing her was their intention, they had had plenty of opportunities to do so before now. She reluctantly jerked the bento box out of Ronin's hand and thanked him for the food before moving forward to eat inside, where she discovered several rice balls filled with kakuni, a piece of braised pork. She hadn't realized how hungry until she had taken the first bite, and she had to suppress her groaning in admiration of the food's incredible flavors, wondering who had prepared such a meal for the assassin. "Hurry, we're leaving soon." She swallowed the food in her mouth and asked, "I thought you were settled for the evening." She was starting to notice that his voice had been low and cold, which was his typical tone. "Well, clearly you were mistaken, Hyuga-han." Hinata, who had grown up being reprimanded and commanded about, became enraged at the subtle slight to her position in her clan and resolutely savored her first meal in more than 36 hours. Over the years, she had mastered the art of remaining silently defiant. As she finished her meal, she held the bento box out to the male who would accept it. Takeshi, wearing a sad expression, mumbled something so low she could hardly hear him. Did she have to eat all of it? She was unable to leave even a single bite. When she was eating, Ronin had moved away to check his own pack, and Hinata noticed a ninjutsu tied to his back with the handle pointing down towards his right hip and the blade pointing towards his left shoulder. It was obviously tied that way to be easily hidden and accessed under his coat, and the fact that it was the 19-inch short sword tied to his back told her he liked the convenience of concealment as well as getting in close to his opponents or victims to ensure their death. She felt embarrassed, but she quickly dismissed the thought. I will not feel embarrassed or ashamed in front of two assassins for hire. When he took the sword off his back, fastened it to his pack, and put his coat back on, she narrowed her eyes to glare at him. She would have been shocked if she hadn't known instinctively that the man had far more weapons on him and in his coat than anyone could ever detect. She could have used her Byakugan to find out how many and where each weapon was, but she really didn't want the confirmation of how dangerous he could be to her. No, he wasn't dangerous. She told herself that he was a bully and a coward, which made her blood run cold and her temper flare. He turned to face her once more, threw his pack to Takeshi, and started to walk toward her. Naruto saw the hateful expression in her eyes and thought, damn, how much worse would she glare at me if she knew the truth of who I am? Despite her obvious disdain for him, he tried to tell himself that every part of his body was attuned to her and wanted her. He was so hard and aching that it was all he could do not to limp. You're such a fool. He was Ronin, cold and lethal. He did not need comfort from anyone, whether it be sexual or emotional. Nevertheless, a part of him tried to suppress the thought of what it would be like to be comforted by her just once. Kami, even my thoughts are beginning to sound ridiculous. Another toad? No, that didn't feel like a toad. We need to move. Naruto froze for a moment as he sensed another presence observing them, but before he could react, it disappeared. As Ronin came closer, Hinata shifted one foot to the side and back, ready to fight if needed, but he stopped 2 feet away, bending one knee and turning to face his back, saying, climb on. Her eyes widened in shock and mild rage at what he was implying, saying, no. Hyuga-san, we're heading out now to take you back to Suna, Takeshi said. To ensure that you don't try to flee and defraud us of our just compensation for your recuperation, Ronin will carry you. Even if it's just for your money, I'm confident you'll return me safely. As you said, I'm not going to run away. As you stated, I'll go with you, Hinata said. Hoping they would believe her and stop there, she had intended to sneak out of the stream while they were sleeping because she knew Ronin was moving around the camp and it would have been more likely that she would be captured. I fear that we cannot rely on your word. This is a common characteristic of assassins now. Please get on my partner's back so that we can move. By the way, that's the last time I'll ask. He had begun with a courteous smile, but by the time he was done talking, his expression had hardened. She took a deep breath and complied with their requests while gritting her teeth and glaring at them both. I can't believe I'm doing this. How much more? No, I won't even ask because things will only get worse. As she climbed onto Ronin's back and wrapped her arms and legs around him, she noticed that she was blushing a little, and she jerked slightly when he wrapped one arm around each thigh just above her knees. Straightening up, he said, relax, and jumped into the tree branches to start the journey back to Suna. Hinata made an effort to keep her upper body as far away from him as possible without almost falling off or making him lose his balance, but this didn't last long because she decided to relax and rested against his back. Ronin tensed at the change but didn't react, so it helped her accept the situation in an attempt to divert her attention from the warm body she was wrapped around. Hinata looked for any distinguishable landmarks to find out how close they were to Sunagakure, but she was exhausted and the warmth radiating off of Ronin combined with his steady movements through the trees was lulling her. The fact that she pressed her chest against his back made Naruto even more enraged. If that was possible, her legs were wrapped around his hips, but not exactly how he wanted them to be, and the smell of her body kept hitting his nose, making him want to swing her around and bury his face in her hair while he gripped one of her breasts. He had underestimated her effect on him, and he genuinely wondered if he could make it to Suna without being overcome by his cravings. He started thinking about that strange presence he'd felt back in the clearing, and he worried about what it might mean. He was so preoccupied with jumping from branch to branch that he forgot to pay attention to their surroundings in case of an ambush. The day had taken a toll on Hinata's body. How else could she have allowed herself to relax enough to sleep in front of a famous assassin? Naruto was shocked to feel her head slump against his back as her arms relaxed even more around his shoulders and he could hear her even slow breaths. The man waiting inside the room tensed in fear as a half-plant, half-man creature appeared to sprout from the wall of a small room on the outskirts of Sunagakure. The creature's body was half white and half black, with an opening around his head that resembled a Venus flytrap. Yes, Jun, your information was correct. I located Ronin exactly where you said he would be, and the Akatsuki is grateful for that. At Jun's feet was a purse of ryos of all the Akatsuki members he had to deal with. This one's appearance made him uneasy. He thought it strange that occasionally, when the Akatsuki member spoke, his mouth didn't seem to move. Your appreciation is sufficient. Zetsu-san, the Hyuga heiress. I must ask, he trailed off, daring to ask Zetsu about her because he had to report to another man after this. Even though she is very attractive, we have no interest in her, the man-plant creature said, tilting his head slightly to the side. I find it interesting why you ask, though however, this ends our business dealings with you. Jun crouched as he watched the Akatsuki member, picked up the purse, and backed out of the room, fearing a death blow at any moment, but that was to be expected when you were a snitch for hire. Are you sure we should have let him go? Said Zetsu's white half. Yes, we may have use of him later, replied the black half. We need to inform Toby, he'll be happy to know we've located our newest recruit. What about his partner? The white half inquired. That is up to Toby, though I'm sure he will be discarded. Unable to recall whether she needed to meet with the other members of Team 8, Hinata found herself in one of the many training grounds in Konohagakure. She paused, wondering why she would be meeting them here, given that she hadn't been a kunoichi for the village or a member of that team for almost 8 years. When she heard someone coming, she looked up to see Naruto, who was 13 years old, approaching with his signature smile while massaging the back of his head. Hey Hinata, how come it's been so long? She felt herself reverting to the shy girl she'd once been in his presence, complete with the blush spreading across her face, as tears welled in her eyes and threatened to spill down her cheeks. Naruto-kun, she whispered breathlessly. You look good Hinata, if a little banged up, Naruto said with a laugh. He hadn't been the best at social graces, which she had found refreshing because it made him always be honest. She had seen people wearing masks too frequently because of her clan, and she had seen the harm that these masks could cause. She kept looking at him, questioning what had happened to him as she drank in his image. I have to go now Hinata. His voice had been so low and quiet, almost as if the life had been drained out of him. Naruto's face turned solemn as Hinata sensed a dark presence approaching from their right. She looked over and saw Ronin in his deep red clothes, black as night jacket and mask. She didn't know what was happening, but she was afraid for Naruto as she was about to step in front of him. What? No, stay put, Naruto-kun. However, it was too late because he had already turned to leave in the direction of Ronin. Hinata was so bewildered that she was unable to comprehend what was happening and became agitated when Naruto appeared to vanish entirely from view as he passed the dark assassin. As she attempted to prevent Naruto from fading away, the tears she had been holding back burst out of her eyes. Naruto-kun. Hinata was ready to kill Ronin for making Naruto vanish, but she was unable to achieve her objective as the world around her started to fade. Ronin was approaching her with a dejected expression on his face. Evidently the steady motion that had lulled her to sleep had abruptly stopped, as Ronin was no longer jumping from branch to branch, and Hinata jerked awake, terrified and upset by the dream she had had. She attempted to orient herself, asking, Where am I? She inquired sleepily. The border between Kei's no Kuni and Kawa no Kuni, Hyuga-heim. Saying her name with him like that instead of San or Sama was as good as him outright disrespecting her station and implying she was nothing more than a spoiled princess, so she jumped off his back as quickly as she could while curling her lip in disgust at his continued insult to her station. At this moment, your subtle insult is not appreciated. I've been drugged, kidnapped, strangled, stabbed, kidnapped, and now insulted by you in the past 48 hours alone. What's coming up next? Some torture or a good maiming? Forgive me Hyuga-san, I was never trained in manners, Naruto said, bowing his head slightly, something he hadn't done in many years. Naruto decided to back off, acknowledging that she was right as she had been through a lot and had handled everything up to this point without going into a frenzy. Okami Hinata, what were you thinking prodding this man? She thought. No, you were trained to kill. She shuddered inwardly at the idea that he might have retaliated against her for confronting him in the manner that she had. He looked suspiciously between his partner and the Hyuga heiress, feeling that something had happened between them while he had located her approaching clan members. Takeshi broke up their confrontation by jumping out of the trees and saying to Ronin, they'll be here shortly. When he tried to push her away by insulting her, she called him out, putting him in his place with a fire in her eyes that he longed to see there for other reasons. Naruto simply nodded in response and stepped back from Hinata to stand slightly behind her because he needed space between the two of them. She had started to thrash a little, making sounds of distress before she jerked awake, and when he turned to face her, pain and hatred were evident in her expression, and he couldn't help but wonder what she had dreamed about. Naruto looked up and thought, damn my luck, this day just keeps getting better. Hiyashi Hyuga emerged from the trees across from them, followed by Neji Hyuga to his right and two other members of the Hyuga clan. Naruto saw that there was another man who was not from the clan, and that he was very different from the Hyugas. All of the members of Hinata's clan, with the exception of Hiyashi, were dressed as Konohagakure shinobi, and the man who was following them was wearing a formal dark green kimono, which was out of place both in their party and in the forest surrounding the border. Naruto's sharp eyes could tell that the kimono was of high quality, and he was a little curious about the man who was wearing it. Naruto watched as Hinata seemed relieved to see her father, cousin, and clan members, though he could tell that the emotions were muted. However, as she started to move forward, everything changed when her gaze fell on the formally dressed man traveling in the back of the group. He could literally see Hinata close in on herself, and he could sense a coldness emanating from her as she clasped her hands in front of her, waiting for them to approach with a downcast gaze. Where was the fire he had just witnessed her displaying? He wasn't sure if this was her usual behavior around her father, but he was starting to suspect it was the fifth man who was causing Hinata's light to fade. When Hiyashi was within arm's reach of Hinata, the group halted, but he made no attempt to touch her. "Are you okay, Nusume?" With reserve, he asked his daughter. "Yes, Oto-san." Naruto gave Takeshi a barely perceptible signal, wondering why she would not tell her father about the hole in her shoulder. "Hyuga-san, the earth spear used by her kidnapper injured your daughter's shoulder. We've cleaned and bandaged it, but it will need to be treated." Takeshi's tone had been objective, devoid of emotion, merely providing the information that was required. "I see," he said, his lips slightly pursed. Finally turning to the two assassins, he gave Takeshi a fleeting glance before carefully examining Ronin. The fifth man, dressed in a kimono, approached Hinata before she could say anything more. "Hinata-chan, I'm glad you are well," he said. "When you vanished, we were all very worried." This man disproved Naruto's belief that a man could appear more reserved and aloof than Hiyashi Hyuga. As she tilted her head slightly in the direction of the man, a tight smile that stopped short of her eyes came on her face. "Nezu-san, I appreciate your concern. We owe Ronin-san and Takeshi-san our gratitude for my safe recovery." She had hardly been able to hide her disdain as she referred to the task as a recovery mission rather than a rescue. When Nezu heard the name Ronin, his eyes widened and he turned to face Naruto, appearing to narrow them in a calculated way. Naruto had seen that expression a lot. It was an indication that the person had just realized he was in the company of a deadly murderer with a huge bounty on his head. "I have your number, buddy," Naruto thought. "You and Nezu should begin escorting Hinata back to Suna so she can be attended by the medical ninja there," Hiyashi said, turning slightly to face Neji. Neji nodded and said, "Yes, Oji-san." He then turned to signal Nezu and the other clan members to start escorting Hinata away. Nezu, who had been standing close to Hinata, reached out to put his hand on her lower back in an attempt to nudge her away. Naruto felt a growl building in his chest, but he forced himself not to let it out when he saw Hinata stiffen at the touch, look up at Nezu with another sour smile, and then move to walk close to her cousin. "What is going on here? Who is this guy that Hinata obviously can't stand touching her?" Naruto hadn't missed the fact that Nezu had never once looked at Takeshi, clearly judging him unworthy of the man's attention, and he probably wouldn't have looked at Naruto either if he hadn't discovered the masked man in front of him was named Ronin. Naruto felt a twinge of pain in his chest as she was led away, and he didn't think he was capable of being upset over her leaving. He almost looked down to find a wound that could be causing the discomfort, but he didn't want to examine his emotions because he never allowed himself to feel any. Hinata looked back once as Neji led the rest of the group away, but Naruto was unable to describe the expression on her face. Takeshi stood up to speak to the leader of the Hyuga clan and was the spokesperson for their collaboration while on the job. "We've met the conditions of the job contract, Hyuga-san. Your daughter has been recovered in as healthy a condition as possible, with her eyes still intact." After acknowledging Takeshi's statement with a nod, Hiyashi turned to face Naruto and said, "As a skilled assassin, Ronin, you are obviously well known. I wonder if those abilities could be used for other projects." Ronin raised an eyebrow curiously, signaling Hiyashi to go on. "The danger to my daughter has increased and will continue to do so as the time of her wedding draws near," Hiyashi said. Naruto had to admit that he was shocked at these thoughts of possession he felt for a former acquaintance he'd known 8 years prior. He heard that Hinata would soon be married, and he now knew exactly who Nezu was. Anger boiled inside him, and he gritted his teeth and crossed his arms to prevent himself from going after that man and killing him. That man will have the right and privilege of touching her body, caressing it, as I'd imagine doing that alone is enough to warrant his death. Naturally, I assigned some of the top shinobi in the Hyuga clan to protect her, but this kidnapping still managed to take place. To protect Hinata until her wedding in 7 days, I would pay you both a high daily rate according to the Hyuga Council. The danger to her will lessen, if not completely stop. After she gets married, I don't want it to appear that I don't believe my clan can protect my daughter, so when I say you would protect her from a distance, I mean it, but even if it means hiring you, I'll do whatever it takes to protect her." Takeshi took the lead again, saying, "Forgive us, Hyuga-san. Your offer is very generous and your request is understandable, but I'm afraid we must decline the job." Naruto and Takeshi had both allowed Hiyashi to speak without interruption, but Takeshi knew at a glance how they should respond to the offer. The Hyuga clan leader nodded slowly, then took out the agreed-upon payment and gave it to Takeshi before turning to go, pausing to say, "If you change your mind let me know, Ronin." Kiyoshi's eyes remained on Naruto even though his body was turned towards Takeshi, so Naruto didn't miss the constant study of his person. As they watched the Hyuga depart, Takeshi stepped up to stand next to Naruto, and once they were certain he had actually gone, they jumped into the trees and started the lengthy journey they would take to deter potential assailants. "Are you certain you won't accept the position?" "It is the decision I will stand by." Despite his increased stamina, Naruto was starting to feel the strain of keeping up such a pace on his muscles, so he swore in harsh pants this couldn't go on much longer, he knew. To rush forward, he sidestepped a senbon that was meant for his throat and blocked a kick to the ribs while trying to use his ninjutsu to cut his opponent across the chest. He jumped back out of Naruto's extended reach because of the ninjutsu, as if anticipating such a move. Naruto never stopped moving forward, and as his opponent's arm swung out to slash him with a kunai, he jumped onto his right foot and spun to duck under it. Landing himself right behind him, it was the ideal stance to strike a fatal blow instead. Naruto struck the back of his opponent's neck with the flat of his blade, not very gently. "You're dead." The image of his opponent changed just as the blade touched the ground, revealing a mound of molded mud that gripped Naruto's arm and leg and started to seep to the ground. A clone of the shadow with his eyes searching frantically for his opponent's location and next move, Naruto leapt backwards, escaping the mud that was trying to hold him in place. He felt a hand grab his ankle as his feet made contact with the floor, trying to drag him down. Naruto disappeared in a cloud of smoke, his eyes crinkling slightly in a cunning smirk concealed behind his mask. Despite his extreme exhaustion, Takeshi persisted in climbing out of the ground and asked, "Cheater, how long have you been using a shadow clone? I think I may have taken on more than I can handle this time." Takeshi laughed and said, "You've got some gall accusing me of cheating after using Dotenkage Bunshin and Shinju Zanshu no Jutsu. I thought we agreed taijutsu only?" Naruto's voice seemed to reverberate around Takeshi. Takeshi turned to face the direction he thought Naruto was. "Yeah, well, I don't have your infamous stamina. I had to end this session somehow." The question that had been bothering Naruto was, "By the way, don't think I didn't notice that you chose not to keep those caves from collapsing on us when we rescued the Hyuga heiress. Your thrill-seeking could have gotten us killed. I had to find some way to motivate your old ass to move faster, didn't I? And you know what, it worked." 10 feet behind Takeshi, Naruto leapt from a tree and resheathed his ninjutsu. Hiding it under his coat, he could tell his friend was getting ready for one of his drawn-out, frequently absurd tirades, so he chose not to reply. Takeshi's side and appeared to sag as he realized that he had once again made a mistake in his sparring strategy with Naruto. Seeing Naruto's eyes grow icy, Takeshi grimaced and said, "Sorry, that was a bad joke to make after what happened. Sparring for 16 hours is a bit much, don't you think? You attempt to go this long during sex, you'll definitely kill a woman in bed." Naruto abruptly turned his back on him, indicating that he was not interested in hearing Takeshi's apology. Naruto had some sex-related hang-ups, such as the fact that his bed partner had slit his throat the last time he had sex, but that wasn't his fault. As he bled out, Naruto was forced to kill her in the bed they had just violently destroyed during sex. Fortunately, Takeshi had been close enough to smell the blood and the cut hadn't been as deep as she had planned. He was determined never to indulge his lust and impulses again. Even though Naruto owed Takeshi his life, he still didn't like his most recent attempt to humor his friend. Hadn't intended to bring up those memories, so Naruto shrugged and decided it was best to just let it go. "Look, I can't keep pretending that there isn't something bothering you. You've been acting like a fox with a sore paw since we returned the Hyuga heiress. So do you want to tell me what's going on in that mind of yours? Honestly, my body can't take much more of you working out your anger on me," Takeshi continued. After saving the life of an old friend 36 hours prior, Naruto found out she had become extremely attractive and became intensely attracted to her. He should disregard his attraction to her because she only saw him as Ronin, regardless of the fact that she didn't know who he was. He found out 24 hours ago that she would be getting married in 6 days. The situation infuriated Naruto, particularly each time he saw a picture of Nezu touching Hinata when she obviously didn't want that touch. He decided to use the image's wrongness as an excuse for his rage, but the real source of his frustration was the knowledge that he was now Ronin to the world and could do nothing to stop Hinata's impending wedding. Since they had returned to one of their safer hiding places, he had, admittedly, been venting his frustration and rage on Takeshi. He was aware of what he wanted to do, but he refused to do it. Maybe he misinterpreted the situation and Hinata just disliked showing affection in public. "Shouldn't you be checking to see if there are any new contracts?" Takeshi's eyes narrowed. He was able to spot a brush-off. He just gave Naruto a nod and let him think. "My friend, I hope you can brush this off the Hyuga as a distraction that will only make you fail. Before arriving at the specified drop location, Takeshi had to make his way through the trees for a little more than 2 hours. Inside a fallen tree, his informant would leave messages about contracts he and Naruto might want to fulfill. He felt his informant's presence as he decelerated, getting ready to descend to retrieve the messages. It wasn't that he hadn't previously caught the man leaving them messages, but it was unexpected that the informant seemed to be waiting for one of them rather than leaving a message. Hello Jun. Who are you backstabbing today? Takeshi was aware that Jun frequently deceived people to obtain a little extra ryo by giving information to anyone who could afford his fee. The man was greedy and afraid of being caught in the act, which would have led to his torture and eventual death. He lacked any sense of loyalty. Ronan's partner's voice startled Jun, who had been pacing until one of them showed up. They always managed to come and go so quietly, and he detested that he had to acknowledge that he was relieved to see the young man with the dark hair instead of Ronan, his masked partner. He was afraid of that man and did not feel comfortable telling the Akatsuki about him. Ronan would suffer greatly as a result of his betrayal if he ever found out. It goes without saying that Jun was anxious to meet with Ronan, but he had to inform them of this possible position. In an attempt to conceal his nervousness, Jun said in a quiet voice, "Not you, Stranger-san, at least not today." "Alright. What's so important that you felt the need to stick around in the middle of nowhere waiting for me?" "I was approached by a man yesterday morning asking if I knew someone who could perform an assassination while retrieving identifying body parts. One instantly thought of you and Ronan." Takeshi seemed calm to Jun, but if this was an attempted trap, he was prepared to act. "I'm flattered you thought of us. What's the job?" Jun groaned. "That's the thing, this job is so tricky. There's a contract already out for this target, but the information I received states a man wants to pay you and Ronan a fee to help him collect on the contract." Takeshi's eyes widened as he let out a deep laugh. He took a moment to catch his breath and then feigned wiping a tear from his eye before sobering up. "That's very funny, Jun." Fidgeting from foot to foot, Jun said, "It's not a joke. Why would we accept a small fee to help someone else collect on a contract? We could easily collect. Do you realize how stupid that would be of us to pass up the chance for the higher fee?" Jun had to at least try to persuade Stranger-san to accept the job. He did not look forward to coming back with bad news. "But Stranger-san, you haven't heard the terms of the offer or the details of the contract." "Very well, I need a good laugh today. Tell me what these details are." Initially, Takeshi had been both amused and a little offended that someone would think Ronan was so foolish as to take such a job. However, he grew increasingly worried as he heard Jun explain the job's specifics. Naruto was already in a foul mood, and this would only make it worse. Jun was forced to lean his back against a tree as he suddenly moved toward him. "You will inform the idiot trying to hire someone to do the dirty work so he can cash in that no self-respecting assassin would accept such a stupid contract." Takeshi began to walk away but stopped, out of curiosity. Who is the dumbass that proposed such a contract? As he stared into the stranger's icy eyes, Jun almost urinated. I don't know," he stammered. "You know these things are done anonymously. A message was left at another contact point." "And you immediately thought of us for this job?" "I didn't think it was out of the ordinary to come to you with it, no." Before heading back to Naruto, Takeshi jumped into the trees and hid to make sure Jun had actually left the area. "Very well," he said. After 8 hours as she listened to her father and Nezu babble on about the advantages of their clan's union, Hinata sighed in boredom and repressed rage for these two. It's a business merger rather than a happy union of the hearts. She sat obediently at the table, anticipating the moment when she could get away from them. Although it had appeared to take a while, the trip back to Suna hadn't. Early the morning before, Ronan and Takeshi had made the nighttime journey to bring Hinata to the border between Kase no Kuni and Kawa no Kuni. She wasn't particularly proud of the fact that she had slept on Ronan's back during the trip, but a girl had to take advantage of the opportunity to sleep. The trip had seemed to take much longer after she was reunited with Nezu and her clan members. Nezu had bothered to talk to her unless it was absolutely necessary, but it seemed to be too annoying. Hinata was aware that his question about her upon their arrival at the border was merely a show for her father. "Having my father think that my future husband doesn't care that I was abused and abducted wouldn't be acceptable." The Kazekage Gara-san had greeted Hinata with medical ninjas to tend to any injuries she had sustained upon her arrival in Sanagakure. The Kazekage had expressed regret that her kidnapping could take place inside his village. Unlike some of the Konohagakure shinobi, Hinata had not cultivated a relationship with Gara over the years, but she held him in high regard because she was aware of his close relationship with Naruto. He looked wise for his age and fit right into the Kazekage role he had played for so long. At the very least, Hinata had reassured him that the Hyuga clan did not hold him responsible for what had happened. She expressed gratitude to him for his concern and the care that the village's medical ninjas had given him. Their assistance allowed her shoulder wound to heal almost entirely. The bandage with a sling on my arm might affect the line my wedding kimono cuts, but at least I'm not walking around with a hole in it anymore, she thought sarcastically. She had been inundated with questions and concerns from her younger sister, Hanabi, when she returned to her room at the inn. In addition, the female branch members of her clan were tasked with helping her get ready for her wedding. Naturally, they were worried about her safety following the kidnapping, but they were also worried about Ronin saving her. They wanted to know every detail about the infamous man that even the most seasoned criminals feared, so they had been asking him all kinds of questions. Though she recognized his attraction, Hinata had been frustrated by their misguided interest in such a man. Before they met, she had been very interested in him, and now she couldn't help but be even more so. However, she told herself that such thoughts were irrelevant because she would never see the man again and she didn't want to. She was unable to pinpoint exactly what it was about him. It didn't help that the unsettling dream of seeing Naruto again and Ronin forcing him to leave kept replaying in her head after she had finally fallen asleep. Though the premise of the dream had changed, Hinata was unable to decipher what the dream was attempting to convey. She would be reunited with Naruto only to see his cheerful disposition shift to one of despair when Ronin arrived, and then Naruto would appear to vanish as Ronin got closer to her. She always woke up right before Ronin could reach her. These dreams startled her and strengthened her resolve to understand their significance. Do you agree, Hinata-san? The sound of Nezu calling her name startled Hinata out of her reverie. What were we talking about, Kami? I'm sorry, I fear I'm still overly tired from my ordeal. What did you say, Nezu-san? He gave her the disapproving glance one would give a child who is prone to forgetfulness, and instead of repeating what he had said, Nezu said, perhaps you should take a nap, Hinata-san. She didn't want to be around him anyway, so she was okay with him using any excuse to get her out of his presence, as it was obvious from his tone. Although he put on a good front in front of her father, Nezu had made it clear from the beginning that he couldn't give a damn about her feelings or opinions on any subject. Hinata had attempted to explain this to her father, but he would not listen, assuming she was just experiencing the pre-wedding anxiety that weak women often experience. Hinata yearned to disprove her father's perception of Nezu and herself when she had let him browbeat her into abandoning her as a Konohagakure shinobi. How could he regard her as anything but weak? She had given him permission to shape her into his ideal of a submissive but frail daughter. Hinata stood and bowed to her father without even looking at her fiancé. Copyright. Pardon me, Oto-san, I think I'll retire to take a quick nap before dinner. Very well, Masumi, said Hiyashi, bowing his head, I will have the physician come to your room in 2 hours. Hinata stopped to consider how much of this conversation she had missed. I'm sorry, Oto-san. Why would the physician be coming to my room? My shoulder is nearly healed. According to Hiyashi, he first looked a little uneasy before glaring at her once more. He almost always looks at me with this expression. Hinata, Nezu has demanded, as is his right as your betrothed, that you be examined to ensure you are still pure after your ordeal. The insolence of this man almost caused Hinata's eyes to swell out of her head. She was upset and ashamed, even though she knew it was his right and a reasonable worry following a kidnapping like hers. His skepticism about her claims that she had not been raped and the embarrassment of having to take such an exam were the sources of both feelings. Hinata answered slowly and clearly, clenching her teeth to prevent Nezu from knowing exactly where he could push his exam. Of course, Oto-san, as it is his right to demand such an exam, it is my duty to acquiesce. As was appropriate for a lady of her station, Hinata tried to exit the room by flowing rather than rushing. She had to take a deep, soothing breath after the room's door was shut and she was standing on the other side, out of sight. The direction her life was taking and the fact that she had no control over it left her feeling angry and depressed. Hinata, lost in her own thoughts, turned the corner and went down another hall, the end of which was her room. She might have been on guard if she had realized that the branch clan member's regular guard had left the hallway. When Hinata looked up, she saw a man dash forward and use a kunai to cut her throat. Hinata overcompensated, throwing her upper body backwards in an attempt to avoid the kunai, and her weight started to drag her to the ground. At the same moment, she raised her right leg and let herself fall. When her attacker's momentum threw him forward and he was unable to stop, she grabbed him in the gut. Hinata snapped her foot back to release it in a forceful kick to the side of the man's head. As he stooped over from her kick, Hinata rolled to her feet, ready to cry for assistance, but a second man grabbed her by the throat, stopping her as she turned away. He then fell into the wall and started to slide down. She channeled enough chakra to throw the man backwards by thrusting both palms into his sternum. Hinata looked at the situation. The first man who had attacked her was trying to get up behind her, and the second was down in front of her but not out. Both potential escape routes had been blocked for her by the two. She decided to run past the second assailant and head back toward her father. As she got closer to the fallen man, she kicked him out and struck him in the side of the head, rendering him incapacitated. She slammed into another man's chest as she turned the corner, and his hands instantly went up to seize her upper arms. Hinata stopped her automatic attack when she looked up and saw Ronin standing in front of her, his icy blue eyes fixed on her. She thought, "He's going to kill me now," as he looked up at the other two assailants before turning to push her against the wall once more as an explosion shook the corridor from the attacker's direction. He pressed his body against hers, pressing her firmly against the wall. An hour and a half earlier, while waiting for his partner to return, Naruto made the decision to continue training and examine some of the jutsu scrolls he and Takeshi had managed to acquire over the years. His training had been somewhat limited since leaving Konoha. During his first year out of town, he had met a number of freelance assassins who had taught him the ropes in addition to providing him with a means of subsistence. The assassins had also taught him useful skills that allowed him to stay hidden from his hometown even though it had been difficult and had almost cost him his life. They had finally agreed to train him, but since they hadn't been very good at jutsus, Naruto did what he always did and learned by making mistakes. If Naruto saw a certain jutsu in action that he believed would be useful, he carefully examined every facet of it and then did his best to replicate it. This approach frequently failed, and he occasionally had to steal jutsu scrolls from other villages, but when it worked, he experienced the same sense of achievement he used to get from training with Ero Sennin and Kakashi Sensei. He had learned that he had a wind release jutsu's affliction through this training method, and he was surprisingly able to use other elemental jutsus in addition to the wind release, though some were more effective than others. Choosing not to waste any time telling his friend what he had learned from Jun, Takeshi leapt out of the trees behind Naruto. "What's wrong? Do we have a job?" Naruto asked as he turned to evaluate him, beating him to the punch. After passing him, Takeshi started to gather their belongings, saying, No, we do not have a job in the. We've been contracted and will receive pay." Concept of having a job. Naruto raised one eyebrow in perplexity and mild glee. "You do realize that made no sense, right?" he asked. "Jun was waiting for one of us at the drop point. He had a rather interesting job offer, to say the least," Takeshi said, sighing deeply and turning to face his friend. After crossing his arms across his chest, Naruto gestured with one hand for Takeshi to continue. Takeshi had made sure to convey the information in a single sentence without pausing because he could see the rage rising in Naruto's eyes. "Okay. There's no easy way to explain this job to you, so here goes. Hinata Hyuga has a contract out for her assassination and the retrieval of her eyes. The fee is actually for her eyes and not her death. Someone contacted Jun to hire us for the job but wants us to submit the eyes so this mysterious person can collect the actual reward on the contract, not us." The thought of Hinata being hunted so viciously filled Naruto with a burning rage. He knew exactly where the original contract on her eyes had come from. The strange thing, though, was that someone else would approach him to handle the grunt work and let that person collect on a contract. It sounded wrong all around. Who proposed the job to Jun? He claims it was done anonymously. With a growl, Naruto interrupted Takeshi. Even when someone tried to stay anonymous, which was impossible with Jun, he knew that was a lie. He and Takeshi were paranoid jerks that Jun feared more than anything else, which was the only reason he was unaware of his true identity. Takeshi was aware that Naruto would be upset. Only a fool could have been so blind as to fail to notice his friend's attraction to Hinata Hyuga. However, Naruto was incredibly erratic, and Takeshi was unsure of what, if anything, he would do in response to the threat against a woman Takeshi believed he had known prior to leaving Konoha. Hiyashi had to have suspected there was a contract. Why else would he offer to hire us to shadow Hinata? Naruto mumbled as he started to pace and consider everything. Takeshi was aware that Naruto was merely thinking aloud rather than speaking to him. This was a bad habit he had formed when he was really upset. Nevertheless, Takeshi decided to add his thoughts to Naruto's digression by saying, "Yeah, but you turned down that job offer. Remember, you did the whole 'it's the decision I'll stand by' spiel." Naruto stopped in the middle of his stride to give Takeshi a fierce look. "I can't just watch her get hunted," he told himself. "Let's go." Takeshi simply nodded, realizing that he and Naruto would not argue about this. 28 minutes and 5 hours later, thanks to a contact of Naruto's that Takeshi had never met, the two had successfully infiltrated the village of Suna. They were so successful that they managed to sneak into the inn without the Hyuga clan members noticing. Once they had found Hinata's room, Naruto gestured for Takeshi to find a different way to get there. Naruto suspected that the man would have tried to hire someone else if he had asked Jun to hire them. Naruto had no intention of taking any chances. Hinata had just escaped an assailant when Takeshi came into the hallway by her room and kicked him in the head. Not too bad. The door to the Hyuga heiress's room opened just as he was about to enter. Revealing another Hyuga woman with her dojutsu Kekkei Genkai activated, Takeshi was unable to resist admiring the girl in front of him, absorbing every detail of her in a few short seconds. Not bad at all. I say again. She swung a chakra-filled palm at Takeshi's heart, indicating that her Byakugan had clearly given her a glimpse of the fight in the hallway. With a swift swat to her ass, he pushed the girl in. After catching her wrist and spinning her back towards the room, he slammed the room door on a furious Hanabi Hyuga and said, "It'll be safer if you stay in here, gorgeous." When Hinata's first assailant saw Ronin in the hallway, he decided to flee in the other direction naturally. This led him directly to Takeshi, who hurled a kunai at his head instead of waiting for Ronin to catch up to him. The assailant made the decision to leave. This would turn out to be a poor choice, though, as he was about to extract an exploding seal from his pouch when he was struck in the wrist by another of Takeshi's kunai. In his agony, the man accidentally activated the seal. Takeshi turned and stormed into the Hyuga's room, saying, "Oh, you baka." He was hit in the abdomen before a blast threw him and the young Hyuga female to the ground. Naruto looked down at Hinata and thought, "Kami, her eyes are the most beautiful." Then he heard the explosion and braced himself to bear the brunt of the fallout, enclosing Hinata in his body to protect her. The smell of her body, which was stronger now that she wasn't covered in blood and dirt, filled his nostrils as he buried his head in her throat. His instinct was to take advantage of her being in this submissive position, but he had other things to do. He felt like he had been hit in the gut, pressed so tightly against her as he withdrew from her. Naruto moaned. He would always remember the impression of her curves against his body. He didn't see Takeshi, but he could see that the attackers were dead from being caught in the blast. As he looked down the hall, he grabbed Hinata firmly by the wrist and pulled her toward the location of his friend. He heard a moan coming from a room. As they got closer to the location where he had last seen Takeshi, he had to admit that even he was taken aback by what he saw. Takeshi was sprawled on top of a woman, his hips ideally positioned between her outstretched legs. "Get up, Takeshi, we don't have time for your indulgences." After being in shock, Hinata finally found her voice and exclaimed, "Hanabi." She tried to run to her sister's side, but Ronin's hold on her wrist prevented her from doing so. As Takeshi climbed off a struggling Hanabi, who appeared to be taking a few more hits, Naruto's mind was racing. "Female, seriously, knock it off. I just saved your life," Takeshi said, stumbling to his feet and avoiding the young woman's feet and fists as he stood on top of her. Get off me," screamed Hanabi. Since Naruto knew Takeshi wasn't ignoring him, he decided to ignore the annoyances of the three individuals present. "Takeshi, grab her, she's coming with us too." "What?" Three distinct voices simultaneously heard Naruto as Hanabi reopened her battle with Takeshi. Hinata decided to start struggling at that point. Hinata had endured a lot over the past few days, and she was exhausted. Her planned marriage, kidnapping, rescue, her betrothed's ongoing disdain, another attempted suicide, and now this was all too much. Hinata struck out with a Juken strike that struck the Tenketsu points in Ronin's shoulder. After activating her Byakugan, his whole arm fell uselessly to his side, and he let go of her left wrist. Hinata wasn't done. She was so furious that she continued to hit Ronin with as many Tenketsu points as she could in an attempt to render him unconscious. She reverted to her old fighting stance and hurried at the man as soon as he crashed into the wall. If Naruto had been anyone else, those blows to his Tenketsu points would have laid him out. Naruto had anticipated some debate from Hinata, but not a full-scale assault. As the Kyuubi inside of him attempted to heal and reopen his closed chakra network, it simply knocked him off balance. He felt bad that I was getting aroused by her fighting spirit. As he watched her get ready to charge Takeshi, they had to secure both Hyuga females and evacuate the area, so now was not the time for that. "Please pardon me, Hinata." Pain exploded at the base of Hinata's skull before she could get within 3 feet of Takeshi and Hanabi, and then everything around her went dark. As she passed out, she believed she heard her sister yell her name. After hitting Hinata to render her unconscious, Naruto flinched behind his mask and swooped her into his arms as she started to fall to the ground. When Naruto looked up to check on her, he saw that Takeshi had followed his example and rendered her unconscious as well. Hanabi was terrified to see her sister knocked out. Regretfully, he hadn't done what he had done, which was to catch the girl before she fell to the ground. Naruto shook his head and let out a sigh. "What?" a bewildered Takeshi asked. "Remind me to teach you some of the finer points of being a gentleman another time," Naruto said, glaring at Hanabi's sprawled body on the ground. "That might not have been my smoothest move. I should probably get that, huh?" Takeshi grimaced as he looked to his left and right before lowering his finger to point at Hanabi. "You think?" As he straightened to stand, Takeshi pulled Hanabi into his arms and he and Naruto heard cries coming. After performing several hand seals and placing his right hand on Hinata's back at the base of her neck, Naruto gently placed her between his bent knees. Bracing her weight against him, he noticed that Takeshi had the audacity to do the same to Hanabi. Leaving behind a seal that swiftly disappeared from view, taking Hinata in his arms, he said, "Time to go." As they separated, each man took a Hyuga female with him, and they fled that area of the inn in 2 different ways. "What do you mean he turned down the job? I didn't pay you that absurd fee for you to fail." Jun resisted. Despite his coldness and cunning, the man in front of him was not nearly as terrifying as Ronin or the Akatsuki. "I did my best, but that half-thrown-together plan to convince him to help someone else collect on a contract was ridiculous." Ronin's partner laughed in my face. "They haven't survived this long by being stupid." The man ignored Jun's remarks. "Fine. You've cost me the bounty on Ronin's head, but no matter, I've already made other arrangements. The Hyuga eyes will be in my hand before the night is out. I will collect the reward for them and get the hell out of this village." Jun was irritated because he had hoped that this man would somehow devise a scheme that would position Ronin so that the Akatsuki would approach him. As of right now, Jun would have nothing to report if Zetsu hadn't been able to keep an eye on Ronin. Jun might not have lived long enough to spend all the ryos he had accumulated. He was starting to feel like a cook trying to stir too many pots at once, knowing that something would eventually boil over. Wincing a little, Naruto placed an unconscious Hinata on the bed. "Perhaps I had struck her too severely." Naruto's hand briefly touched her cheek before he caught himself and jerked away as he reached out to push the hair out of her face. The desire he felt as he gazed at her was telling him, "This can't happen." He went back to the suite's main room and found Takeshi observing Hanabi as she lay on the couch. He gazed at her as if he were examining a riddle that required solving. A soft knock on the door interrupted Naruto before he could respond to Takeshi's actions. Before opening the door 10 inches, he checked to confirm their visitor and silently gave Takeshi the signal to keep out of sight. And Enbu of Suna was standing there, with his entire face aside from his eyes hidden behind a strip of cloth with a slight bow of his head. Naruto said, "Thank you for coming." The Anbu spoke with a low voice. "Yes, well, I had no choice. Thanks to your antics in the other wing of this inn here, he sent you these. Use them wisely." After accepting a key and a wrapped bundle of beige cloth, Naruto said, "I understand. Tell him." The Anbu interrupted him in the middle of his sentence by raising his hand. The Anbu turned and silently departed Naruto, saying, "He knows he said to tell you. Be sure of what you want, whatever that means." As he walked away, Kankuro gave the man a silent thank you. Naruto understood the meaning of the message. His wise friend seemed to take pleasure in reminding him of a conversation he had had with Gaara a number of years prior. Half a decade before, 2 Sanagakure shinobi stood behind a 15-year-old Naruto, who kept his head down so the hood of his cloak wouldn't reveal his hair and reveal his identity. "Kazekage-sama, we captured this young man attempting to enter the village." He was startled to see who the Kazekage was when he looked up. One Gaara of the desert sat behind a big desk. "Well, at least one of us accomplished something in life, Gaara. You have my admiration." Gaara looked at the man in the cloak and mask in front of him. "Are you a threat to my village?" he asked, and the young man simply shook his head in response. He looked curiously at this shinobi. "Kazekage-sama, he refused to remove his mask and cloak. He refused to tell us what village he is affiliated with, and he refused to give a reason for seeking entrance to the village." "Is this true?" Gaara asked, nodding slowly and looking perplexed as he resumed his conversation with the young man. "You will speak to the Kazekage with the respect he deserves, not with nods and shakes of your head," the shinobi said authoritatively before the young man could nod in agreement. Gaara watched as the young man's hands balled into fists. "Yes, Kazekage-sama, it is true," Gaara asked, "and do you have an affiliation with any known villages?" "No, Kazekage-sama. What is your purpose in Suna?" The young man sighed at this question, then lifted his head just enough to let the hood of his cloak slide back, revealing a few strands of blonde hair that resembled spikes gazing into the young man's eyes. Gaara recognized the person in front of him. He dismissed his shinobi with a wave of his hand, saying, "Leave us. I have much to discuss with this young man." "But Kazekage-sama, you will leave us? My safety is not in jeopardy, is it?" Gaara interrupted his shinobi, asking the young man in front of him, whose eyes wrinkled above his mask. "No, Kazekage-sama, you are not in jeopardy from me." As they tried to stutter protests and watched the village intruder warily, Gaara waved his shinobi out of his office. Gaara installed privacy seals around his office as the shinobi's door closed behind them. "Naruto Uzumaki, I must say I am both surprised and pleased to see you alive and well in my office." As Gaara shut the curtains and windows in his office, Naruto lowered the hood of his cloak. Naruto lowered the mask on his face as well and grinned at Gaara once no one could see or hear him inside the office. "It is good to see you again, Gaara. It's surprising, and, forgive me for stealing a term from Shikamaru Nara, troublesome to see you again, Naruto." When Shikamaru was mentioned and his most frequently used phrase was used, the corner of Naruto's mouth twitched into a half smile. You've put me in a tough position coming here, Naruto. You've been a missing nin of Konohagakure for 2 years, and as such it should be my duty to immediately detain you and report your location to the Hokage. So tell me what has led you down this path and why I won't be doing as I should. Gaara nodded in agreement when Naruto motioned to one of the chairs to ask if he could sit. I thank you for not detaining or reporting me, Gaara. I do not wish to cause you any trouble, he said, opening his cloak and sitting down. Noticing that Naruto's clothes were dark red, Gaara said, I see you have more to tell me other than why you left Konoha, my friend. Gaara pointed to Naruto's clothes and said, like why you've taken on the persona of Ronin, an assassin who is gaining quite a reputation. In an attempt to break the habit, Naruto rubbed the back of his head and asked, how have I amassed a reputation? I've only been working as an assassin for a few months. Well, when one assassin can amass an army in the blink of an eye, people start to notice. Oh no, I need to use more caution when choosing my jutsus. Although I was aware that Rasengan was out, I didn't believe the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu was. Gaara appeared to be interpreting Naruto's ideas. You have to be more careful if you don't want to be found using a shadow clone technique. Isn't unheard of, but no one other than Naruto Uzumaki can use that technique to such a level. Coming here could have been the biggest mistake you've made so far. It could have been? Asked Naruto. Gaara laughed. As I said, I won't report your location to Konohagakure. Please begin. I'm sure this will be a riveting tale. After grinning at Gaara without humor, Naruto said, I no longer claim affiliation to any village, nor do they claim me. Naruto then went on to tell Gaara why he became an assassin, adopted the name Ronin, and became a missing nin. Following his explanation, Gaara declared that Naruto or Ronin would have refuge in Suna for as long as he could naturally, by within his power. Gaara meant as long as he could do it covertly and avoid disclosing that he had permitted a missing nin to survive in his village unharmed. You were my first friend and one of the only people who understood how I felt as a Jinchuriki. I will do my best to help you by honoring that bond, Gaara said with pride. I cannot express how grateful I am for that, Gaara, but I do not wish to bring trouble to you or this village. Gaara disregarded his friend's worries as they worked together to come up with a message relaying system and a plan for Naruto to sneak into the village. Now, because his friend said it was too dangerous, Takeshi had never met Naruto's contact in Sanagakure. He knew that Naruto had to trust him with every other part of his life, so he wasn't offended or thought that Naruto didn't trust him. The conversation seemed to last no more than a minute, so it didn't seem to matter that he couldn't hear what was being said at the door. After locking the door, Naruto turned back to Takeshi and unwrapped the bundle in his arms, offering him a key and a suit of clothes. With a pause to give Takeshi a sour look, he said, Here, get change, then you're going to take her, pointing to a still unconscious Hanabi, to the room. This key is for and secure her there so you can report the situation to her father. I do not mean tie her down either. You will use the seals I taught you to keep her from escaping the room. You sure do know how to take all the fun out of a situation. Do you know that? Takeshi said, looking horrified, snatching the clothes from Naruto's hands so he could change in the restroom. He looked to be dressed as an Enbu of Suna when he emerged from the restroom, wearing a beige shirt, pants, and flak vest. He had a piece of cloth wrapped around his head and covering his face beneath his eyes more gently than Naruto would have thought. He picked up Hanabi in silence and walked out of the room. The inn had 4 wings, each of which was positioned so that it appeared to be pointing in a particular direction. There were numerous lounges and conference rooms at the epicenter and spread out across the 4 wings. Takeshi and Naruto had moved both females to the north wing, while the Hyuga heiress's room had been in the east wing. Takeshi now escorted Hanabi to a different suite farther down the north wing. How come nobody notices the 2 high-born women being escorted around this stench-filled hotel? Takeshi gave a mental shrug. Since we just saved their asses, I suppose I shouldn't be complaining because I wouldn't want to draw attention to them, he thought. That's a perfect ass, as he looked down at the passenger in his arms. The adage, beware your enemies least suspect you, serves as the justification for this. They don't expect you to stay where you were just attacked or to be right in front of them. It was necessary to split up the Hyugas because, even though Hinata is the main target of the contract, Hanabi would still be targeted for her eyes if she went into hiding. Takeshi was aware that Naruto had now given him complete responsibility for the younger Hyuga's safety, which he didn't like. Not because he detested being by himself with a beautiful woman, no. He didn't like it because he was worried about letting Naruto spend time alone with a girl he liked. She is a magnet for trouble and danger, as evidenced by the fact that they had to save her life twice in 40 hours. She's obviously drawing the most lethal assassin. After balancing the young lady in his arms, Takeshi unlocked the suite's door, kicked it shut with his foot, and turned to locate the bedroom so he could place his passenger down. She's quite skilled at feigning unconsciousness while she waits for an advantageous moment to attack. For example, When there's no chance that I'll knock her flat on her ass choosing to test her, Takeshi said. It's too bad you're unconscious, beautiful. We could have fun while waiting for daddy to come collect you. Ah, who am I kidding? I'll have fun whether you're conscious or not, just as soon as I get you secured to that bed right there. Takeshi awaited the lash out from the bundle in his arms. She had attacked him before and after the explosion, and he had to admit it was cute because of his lecherous remarks. He anticipated another outburst of her attempts to harm him. He placed her on the bed and kept her on guard when she didn't try to attack him right away, but she managed to stay unconscious. He cautiously retreated and waited. There was a discussion about not tying her to a bed when Hanabi returned to the land of wakefulness. It would be reassuring to wake up to that conversation. She had pretended to stay unconscious in order to get information about her sister's whereabouts and state of health, but she was promptly taken away. Because it's a conscious instinct to tense up when a stranger touches you, let alone picks you up, it took all of your willpower to stay calm. Neither man said anything more, and she was carried at least 30 feet from the room where she had woken up, suggesting that her efforts had been in vain based on the average length of a man's strides and the number of steps he had taken. She had estimated this distance many years ago, when she was still a member of Team 8. Hinata taught her this technique, and at the time, she thought her sister was awesome, and she's now. Hanabi pushed such thoughts away with a mental shake of her head. This was not the moment. In order to get away and locate Hinata, she had to find out where they had relocated her. She listened for any sign that the man had left the room, like movement, but when she gave it some thought, she saw that he had silently carried her. The trip had been eerily quiet aside from the usual sounds of doors being opened and closed, except of course when he spoke. Although she couldn't deny that she had felt a surge of anger, she had been taught to wait patiently and wait for the right opportunity to attack. She had to take the chance of using her Byakugan to check if he had left after what seemed like 20 minutes of waiting. She glanced around the room, but no one was there. Hanabi noticed that she was in a suite that resembled the one she and her sister had shared. The inn must still be where I am if Hinata wasn't kidnapped. Perhaps she is still here as well. I can look for her if I can get out of this room. Her only desire was to quickly leave the room and locate her sister, so she sat up and kept her Byakugan on to notify her of the young man's return. But when she saw the Suna Anbu in front of her, she gasped and fell back onto the bed as soon as she got up and turned off the Byakugan. When did you arrive? She asked, getting up and walking past him. Did you see the man who left me here? Has he been detained? We must begin a search for my sister immediately, she said, her voice brimming with all the authority appropriate to her position. She spoke so fast that the Anbu seemed to be having trouble understanding the jumble she had just spat at him. He grabbed her arm before she could pass the Anbu and said, "You will be staying here, gorgeous." She turned to face him, her eyes widening in shock as she recognized that voice and became enraged that she had been duped so readily. "No, I will not," she said, slowly enunciating each word and making sure his eyes were on her face. She had reached up and grabbed the thumb of the hand holding her arm. Twisting it away to force him to let go, she swiftly and forcefully rammed that elbow into his side, sending him staggering a few feet away. That's what ought to have happened. Anyway, with his forearm lightly pressing on her throat, the man instead wrapped his opposite arm around her neck, turning her and drawing her tightly back to his chest. Knowing that there was nothing she could do to prevent him from knocking her out in a matter of seconds if he started to apply pressure to the carotid artery, Hanabi froze. To make sure she didn't struggle, he put his other arm around her midsection. She was by herself with a man who knew how to stop her and avoid being noticed by her Byakugan. How on earth did he accomplish that? He should have been standing in front of the door, visible to me. She clenched her teeth at how vulnerable she was, and his voice sounded like a low rasp in her ear. "Apparently you forgot the fact that I saved your life earlier. Now tell me, why would I do that if I intended to kill you now? Why should I presume to know the thoughts of some strange assailant?" Hanabi asked, struggling a little. Good point, Hyugaheim." In response to this sarcastic remark, Hanabi snapped, "What do you want? If you are going to kill me, then do so. If your intention is to rape me, I swear you won't live to regret it." Takeshi had been thoroughly enjoying this encounter. He was intrigued by the small Hyuga in front of him, knowing that he needed to put an end to this little conflict of wills and finish the task Naruto had given him. He sighed through the Anbu mask. A tantalizing aroma reached him, and he couldn't resist lowering his head a little to find the source of the Spitfire in his arms. "What do you think you are doing? Let go of me at once," Hanabi said, trying to jerk away from the man as she felt his head slant closer to her. Takeshi used that opportunity to exert the pressure required to knock her out once more. Being careful not to let her fall to the ground, he swiftly put her back on the bed and started to install the seals on the windows and exterior door so she couldn't leave the room. Takeshi gave the unconscious young woman one last glance, grinned a little beneath the cloth covering his lower face, and left the room. In the meantime, Hinata woke up abruptly, sitting up in bed, feeling panicked, but she couldn't remember why. She was alone in her room when she looked around, but as she looked more closely, she saw that everything was off. All of the furniture was on the other side of the room. I'm still in the inn, so I'm not in my room. Whose room is this? She wondered. Then she was reminded of the explosion, Ronan, Hanabi, and the attack in the hall. She said to herself in a whisper, Hanabi, where are you? She activated her Byakugan and looked around the suite, but nobody was there. What the? Why would they kidnap me and then abandon me? Hanabi. Was she the target of the attack, and I was just in the way? In an effort to find Hanabi's chakra signature, Hinata expanded her field of vision, which was straining her eyes and chakra reserves. She had to find out if Hanabi was still nearby, though, so she was resolved to search the entire inn. In her quest for Hanabi, Hinata took her time identifying each individual in the vast building and grounds of the inn. She had already found Neji, her father, and the other clan members who were accompanying them. As the strain of using the Byakugan started to wear her down, she grew more and more irritated. She tried to widen her field of vision even more in order to search the area around the inn. Unfortunately, Hinata felt a hot liquid trickle down her face and a sharp pain shoot through both of her eyes. At this point, when the coppery smell of blood reached her nose, she realized she had pushed too far. She closed her eyes, dejected that she couldn't push herself past these boundaries. To find her sister, she got up with her eyes closed and tried to walk to the bathroom, remembering her way around the room. But then she heard a voice that made her shiver, and she froze. When he smelled blood, Naruto had been pacing the suite's outer room in silence, wondering how he would handle being by himself with Hinata and what he should do to keep her safe. He was afraid of the reason and knew that no one could have entered the room, so he wasn't sure what to anticipate, but he didn't expect to see Hinata by herself. Stumbling toward the bathroom with her hands out in front of her, he stopped moving forward into the room and asked, "What have you done?" His tone was harsher than he had intended, and he hoped Kami wouldn't notice the worry in his voice. Hinata was shocked to see Ronan present. How did he get into my line of sight so quickly? As she turned to face him, she opened her eyes to find that blood had clouded her vision. Rather than showing weakness by trying to rub her eyes, she assumed a fighting stance, prepared to defend herself. The sight of blood gushing from Hinata's eyes made Naruto take a sharp breath. He knew that he hadn't done that when he had rendered her unconscious. He whispered, "You little baka, what have you done?" Hinata was perplexed by his tone, which bordered on worry. She yelled, "Where is my sister?" She was unable to see him or hear any movement, but as he held her head up, she felt a gentle grip on either side of her face, while the more prominent part of her mind experienced an adrenaline rush brought on by fear. Another part of her mind was shocked by how gently he touched her as she launched a blind attack. She tried to jerk her face away, but he held onto her face and repelled her attempts to do so without hurting her. "Stop," he yelled, "I need to see the extent of the damage." Hinata was shocked by his words and deeds, and her face became confused as she froze, whispering, "I don't understand," she said. He started to try to wipe the blood away with his fingertips and asked, "What is there to understand? You've foolishly caused harm to your eyes and I need to see just how bad it is." Hinata twitched a little before trying again to push him away and removing her face from his hold, but she was only able to get a couple of inches between them before she heard a frustrated sigh. Why should he feel frustrated? It's me who has been kidnapped and is without a sibling. In an attempt to wipe the blood from her eyes, she swiftly smeared her arm over her face, but in the process, she smeared the blood all over her face and arm. Blood was not a problem for Naruto in his line of work because it happened frequently, but seeing Hinata's blood and realizing that she was in pain unsettled him on a deeper level that he didn't want to investigate too thoroughly. Putting the emotion aside, he knew that if he didn't reassure and calm Hinata, his efforts to keep her safe would be in vain because she would keep trying to harm him. As he stepped back, he tried to speak in as soothing a tone as his roughened voice could manage, despite his intense desire to assist in cleaning her of the blood and administering first aid to her eyes. "You're safe. Okay, I'm not going to hurt, maim, rape, or kill you, I give you my word." Hinata spat back at him, asking, "Why should I trust the word of a known assassin? What was the origin of the small she-devil? What became of the quiet, reserved girl I recall?" Naruto had to admit that he was intrigued by this version of Hinata, even though he couldn't comprehend what could have changed her so drastically over the years. His sarcastic statement, "Clearly you have some issues with me being an assassin," brought attention to the obvious. "By all means, don't hold back, tell me how you really feel." Hinata frowned at the dark blur in front of her, which she recognized as Ronan, and she became a little worried that even after wiping away the blood, her vision remained blurry. The blur paced away from her before she could react. Naruto crossed his arms over his chest and paced as if he had nothing else important to deal with. "Though I must say I'm curious as to what you could possibly have against me. I mean, after all, didn't you used to be a shinobi for Konohagakure? And don't the shinobi of hidden villages perform assassinations for a fee?" Oh, but let me guess, it's different when an assassination is carried out by directive of a cage versus what I do, is that it? Although Hinata was perplexed by the direction of the conversation, she believed his sarcasm was an insult to her intelligence. If you must know, my issue is not so much that you are an assassin, I could care less about that. It is the fact that you are a man who would kill anyone if the price were right. Shinobi do perform assassinations, on that you are correct. However, those assassinations are only approved by my Hokage if the reasons for it are justified. Your ethics vary depending upon the amount of money offered to you. You are essentially without true morals. Everyone knows of your ruthless ways and how you never leave any survivors. Tell me, how many innocent people have you killed because the fee for the contract was lucrative? How many women? How many children? Her gullibility astounded Naruto, and he became enraged. When Ronin abruptly rushed forward and pushed Hinata back against a wall, she was startled. He kept a few inches between them rather than pressing his body against her as he had done at the time of the explosion. Scoffing at her, he went on, "You know nothing of my morals, values, or ethics. You know nothing of me, so do not presume to." Naruto turned away from Hinata, feeling angry at her perception of his character. He genuinely had no one to blame but himself. You are a naive fool. Do you honestly believe that every mission of assassination designated by your Hokage is a just one? Do you have any idea how many assassinations are carried out for money, power, or jealousy? It seems that he was successful in his goal to change from the person he had been in Konoha. He felt compelled to correct her on one point as he turned to face her over his shoulder. I have never killed an innocent man, woman, or child if I could help it, nor have I accepted money for doing so when it was unavoidable. Hinata struggled with mixed feelings and thoughts about the man in front of her. In her mind, he was a ruthless murderer who had most likely kidnapped her for ransom or injured her sister for the same reasons. When she evaluated how this man had saved her from Goru and Daichi, treated her injured shoulder, and then brought her back to her family, her feelings started to overpower her reason. Not to mention that earlier in the hall he had seemed to be protecting her from the aftermath of the explosion. Even though she was hostile toward him, he had not slapped her once, and it was clear that he was concerned about what was wrong with her eyes. When he first entered the room, Hinata realized right away that she had made assumptions about this man based on his reputation. She was the best person to know how easily a story could be embellished when it was passed from one person to another. She held out a hand as if to stop him, but she could barely see him as she stepped forward with a voice full of shame. "I am sorry, you are right, I made some harsh assumptions about your character. If you are not going to harm me in any way, then may I ask why you've abducted me and what has been done with my sister?" Halfway out the door, Naruto stopped and gripped the knob, taking a deep breath to try to calm himself. He had to realize that Hinata had experienced 2 attacks on her person recently, so it was understandable that she would be a little hostile and distrustful now that her sister was involved. He turned toward her. "Your sister is safe. In fact, she may be on her way back to Konoha with your cousin and other clan members as an escort any minute now. I'm going to get you a change of clothes. I don't know how poor your vision is right now, but you're covered in debris from the explosion and blood from your eyes, which have finally stopped bleeding. You may want to clean up. Then we'll check the severity of the damage to your eyes and I will explain the situation to you as best I can." Hinata acknowledged that she would like that with a slow nod. As of right now, she was too preoccupied with trying to figure everything out on her own to figure out why Ronin was in Sanagakure. She hoped he was right to assume Hanabi was safe and that she was returning to the safety that was guaranteed inside Konoha's walls and their clan compound. Given her training, she knew that the blurriness would eventually go away as she rested her eyes, so she wasn't overly worried about them. He hurried out of the room and came back with what she thought was a change of clothes because it looked like a cloth-shaped blur right now. She made contact in an attempt to prevent him from entering her personal space, which seemed to be a common occurrence with this guy. He put the ties to what felt like a sack in her outstretched hand with one hand while holding her forearm with the other. When Naruto realized she might require assistance in removing the blood if her vision was impaired, he was about to leave the room once more. He turned back to her, grateful that the mask had covered his face to conceal his blush, and asked, "Do you need help getting cleaned up? The blood, I mean, do you need help removing the blood from your face?" His body hardened as he saw her standing in the shower, and he was unable to tell if more of his blood had moved to his face or to a lower part of his anatomy. The idea of him helping her wash off made Hinata flush, and she responded with a sly smile, "Thank you, but I think I'll manage on my own." Naruto barely stopped himself from reaching up to rub the back of his head after feeling as though he had avoided a bullet with that one. "All right, just call out if you do need help. I must leave this room before I further embarrass myself or do something that I will later regret." Wondering whose clothes she would be wearing this time, Hinata reached down to loosen the ties on the sack as the door closed. Inside was a soft hooded jacket, a camisole, and a pair of shinobi pants. The jacket's size and material felt similar to one of her own, so she scowled in perplexity. Were these garments stolen from my room? Even though she was no longer a shinobi, she had always felt most at ease when she was dressed as one, and she was not permitted to wear what she wanted while Sanagakure was setting up the conditions for her marriage. I am a high-born lady, and father believes it would be wrong for me to appear any other way when she was not in her suite. She wore kimonos and well-made dresses that maintained her modesty. She was therefore happy that Ronin had picked out clothing that would keep her cozy. All she had to do now was get to the bathroom and get into the shower without dying. Naruto had been pacing the suite's outer room in an effort to resolve the conflict. As of right now, he was aware that Hinata's life was in jeopardy, that she was getting married in 5 days, and that he needed to find a way to protect her without coming out as him or abusing her sexually. It goes without saying that he was under more stress than ever before. He moaned as he heard the shower in the adjacent room start up and saw her standing nude beneath the water, which was sluicing down her body and stroking her skin. He shifted to sit cross-legged on the floor against the suite's far wall, opening his eyes and shaking his head as if to shake off the vision. He had not been known for his patience prior to leaving Konoha, but he had since learned to remain composed and patient in the face of adversity now, forcing himself into a meditative state. He found it difficult to do the same when he heard the water shut off. He had just managed to find his inner peace, or coldness as Takeshi would call it, and was ready for the conversation. Feeling better, more refreshed, and more at ease, Hinata squared her shoulders as she entered the suite's main room after taking a deep breath. "How are your eyes?" he asked, looking up at the sound of her door opening. Her vision was now only faintly blurred around the edges, a sign that her eyes had started to heal. She decided to get straight to the heart of her worries when she noticed Ronin standing with his arms folded across his chest. "They're better, thank you. I am able to see with only a slight blur. I expect they'll continue to get better as time goes by." "What are you doing in Suna?" she asked. He crinkled his eyes in what she assumed was a smile and said, "Not going to beat around the bush, are you?" He waved her remarks away before she could say anything more. "You might want to take a seat. Takeshi and I are here to protect you. Your father requested our services as your personal guard." Since it was a minor detail that didn't need her attention, Naruto decided not to inform her that they had originally turned down that request. "Okay," she said, encouraging him. He continued, "Currently there is a contract out on you in the collection of your eyes, Takeshi, and I discovered when we were approached with the job of handing over your eyes to someone who wishes to collect on the contract. So which job are you truly here to perform, my protection or my death?" Hinata tensed at this information. "I understand your mistrust, but I assure you neither myself nor Takeshi are here to harm you or your sister," he added after he had sighed deeply. "I've moved you to this room to keep you close to your father during the preparation for your wedding." As he made that final statement, Naruto clenched his teeth, proud that he had not broken them. "We are going to try keeping your exact location a secret from those who may be assisting in these attacks on you." "And my sister?" Hinata asked, nodding, comprehending the rationale behind the choice. "If someone is targeting you for your eyes and cannot reach you, it is a logical assumption that your sister, the only other available unsealed Hyuga, would then become a target." "You make an excellent point. Thank you for your protection of me and my sister. Now what do we do?" The way she handled everything surprised him. He recalled that before he had left Konoha, Hinata had been a composed and reasonable woman, so he assumed her acceptance of the circumstances shouldn't come as a huge surprise. "Your father and the elders council of your clan believe that the danger to you will cease once you are wed, so for now we keep you safe until then and try to figure out who has directed these last few attacks on you. You want to use me as bait to lure out this mysterious person," she said without question as she suddenly realized. "There has always been a threat against you and any other unsealed member of your clan in a bid to gain the Byakugan. These sudden attacks on you are suspicious. The fact that someone is attempting to hire out for the ability to collect on the contract raises many red flags. I believe that is where we should focus our attention to ensure your safety even after you are wed, so yes, I do intend to use you as bait, as you put it." "All right, then you have my full cooperation," she said, nodding. The sound of the room's door closing caused Hanabi Hyuga's eyes to open and her Kekkei Genkai to silently activate. The man she knew must be strolling down the hall was nowhere to be seen when she looked toward the room door cleverly. It must be a seal on him or me to make the Byakugan useless, knowing that the man had either planned to choke her or put her in a blood hold. She had been ready when he put his forearm around her throat, since the pressure he applied was to the carotid artery at the side of her neck rather than her larynx. It was obvious that he had intended to use a blood hold. When the pressure was applied, she had fought a little but pretended to pass out quickly to avoid actually being knocked out when the man was in front of her. And even when he thought she was at his mercy, he had found numerous opportunities for attack. She had been trained to strike when it was appropriate, so she decided that attacking before learning more about the circumstances and her sister's location was inappropriate. She jumped out of bed and paced the room, looking for anything that might reveal more details after the explosion had flung the man into her. She recalled seeing a masked man behind Hinata. Would Ronan have been there? Why is he in this place? She couldn't stop thinking about whether the explosion was a ruse to kidnap Hinata or whether the man who had saved her sister was now a danger. She tried opening the windows in the room one by one, wanting to give the stranger enough time to move away before trying to open the door. She glared at the door and then stomped over to try to yank it open after discovering that none of the windows would open, dropping her arms in frustration. Once more, the outcome was unsatisfactory because, like the windows, the door resisted her attempts to open it. She had begun her attempts by merely pushing and/or pulling on the door and windows. Her temper quickly erupted, and she started attempting to break out the windows by any means necessary before moving to the door and trying again. She had become so desperate that she had applied the few jutsus she knew aside from the gentle fista to the door and windows in an attempt to create an escape route. Seals must be involved. She was not good at sealing, so she thought frustratedly that it would just have to be fuinjutsu. Hanabi collapsed on the couch in the suite's main sitting area, exhausted as if her efforts had amounted to a full training day. She recalled her father's warning when he reprimanded her for having a short fuse, saying that anger burns bright and fast and wears one down more quickly than physical exertion. Uncertain of what to do, she asked the empty room, "Well, what now?" She made a decision after quickly scanning her surroundings in an attempt to calm her racing thoughts and feelings. Now is the time to prep the ground, because, in the end, home court advantage matters significantly. Hanabi got up and started looking again for things that would help her get ready for whatever might happen the next time someone came into the suite. She yanked the shower rod off the wall after entering the bathroom and giving the shower a sly smile as she exited the restroom. She placed the rod on the couch and glanced up at a 6-foot-tall floor lamp, which she positioned nearer the door. She put the lamp down and plugged it in before turning to face the suite's tiny kitchenette. As she chewed her bottom lip, she pondered whether it was equipped with cookware and dishes. After carefully arranging her belongings in places where they would be most helpful to her, she felt better knowing that she was as prepared as she could be. Sitting there waiting for someone to try to enter through the door was the only thing left to do. Hiyashi Hyuga had witnessed his eldest daughter leave the meeting with her fiancé copyright, obviously furious but making him proud because she didn't show any signs of her internal conflict. He cocked his head to the side, examining the young man who would soon marry his daughter, then turned back to Nezu Damasu. He had admired the young man's stoicism when he first met him, but as time went on, he started to suspect that the stoicism was a result of his lack of affection for Hinata. Regretfully, he could not decide to back out of this marriage and still maintain his dignity. The Hyuga clan's reputation must always be impeccable. Canceling this wedding would just not be acceptable if it was. Nezu could say that they had decided not to perform the ceremony in order to conceal the fact that Hinata had actually lost her virginity. It wouldn't matter if the clan said she had been a victim and it had been taken from her during her kidnapping. The only thing anyone would notice is that the Hyuga clan's heiress was damaged. He took a deep breath and reached up to pinch the bridge of his nose, pretending to listen to Nezu's trivial conversation, if only to himself. He activated his Byakugan and turned to face the hall as he saw the chakra signatures of both daughters vanish as the building's foundation shook with the sound of an explosion. It would be a huge understatement to say that Hiyashi Hyuga was shocked, since his daughter's chakra signatures had been at healthy levels prior to their disappearance. He knew they were still alive. Chakra signatures show a dying flame fading to nothing when a person is dying, even if it's a sudden death. Hiyashi went into the hallway and called for his nephew, opening the door to the meeting room with enough force to cause it to slam into the wall and bounce back, conveniently hitting Nezu. As he followed, he made his way toward the suite in the east wing of the inn that was set aside for both of his daughters. Neji Hyuga had rapidly trailed behind his uncle and was concerned about his cousins after he too had seen them appear to vanish. "The guards I posted between the meeting room and their suite have vanished." Nezu followed them at a slower pace, but they were too preoccupied to notice or care. Unconcerned with the dead, they swept past the scene of the explosion and the bodies of two men as soon as they entered the east wing and entered the suite, where it was clear that there had been some struggle. The two Hyuga females and any hints as to where they vanished were not visible. Nezu stood close to the door, trying to contain his rage while wearing a shocked expression. Neji and Hiyashi looked around the room. The guards had been found unconscious and crammed into a closet in the hallway back by the meeting room. According to another Hyuga branch member who entered the room, the guards had apparently been moved after being drugged in some way. "What is this, Hiyashi? Some elaborate scheme to get out of the wedding?" Nezu snarled as he rushed forward after making up his mind after observing the room. In response to the baseless charge, Hiyashi's head jerked up and his eyes narrowed upon Nezu. He spoke slowly and gritted his teeth. "Nezu-san, even I would not go so far as to drug members of my own clan." Destroy a public establishment, risking harm to bystanders and potentially putting my daughters in danger. If I did not wish for this wedding to proceed, I suggest you watch your tongue more closely before you make accusations you will regret. Are you threatening me, Hiyashi-sama? Nezu asked, stepping back as if Hiyashi had hit him. Hiyashi turned away from the idiot and said, I do not deal in threats, Nezu-san. He then went back to looking around the room and planning to have the inn and the area around it searched for clues about the whereabouts of his daughters. Nezu managed to leave the room with ease as the Hyugas were focusing on it and planning their moves. He had fulfilled his role as the worried Fionka copyright. Now he required clarification. Takeshi left Hanabi Hyuga unconscious in the suite and strode down the north wing. He knew that the head of the Hyuga clan would not be in the meeting room following the explosion, so he headed out a window to the east wing. He had to keep in mind that he was dressed as a Suna Anbu, so he had to behave as such by coming and going through windows, as he had heard Naruto say true Anbus do. He hurried over the roof and re-entered through a window close to the east wing's mouth. To his surprise, Hinata's Fionka copyright was storming out. Takeshi was naturally curious, and his curiosity was heightened when he learned that his best friend was attracted to this man's Fionka copyright. He observed from a distance as Nezu emerged into a thoughtfully designed garden and made his way to the rear corner, close to a big tree. What the devil is this guy doing? Staying by a window, he watched. He doesn't seem like the nature type. He was taken aback and suspicious when he saw Jun emerge from behind the tree, standing in the shadow of its branches, while Nezu seemed to be firmly reprimanding him. Choosing to inform Naruto of this new information later, Takeshi hurried off in search of Hiyashi Hyuga. Hiyashi was startled to see an Anbu of Suna approaching him as he stood just outside his daughter's suite. He turned to the Anbu and prayed in private that this man knew something about where his daughters were. The man bowed slightly and said, Hiyashi-sama, may I speak with you privately? After giving a nod, Hiyashi motioned for the Anbu to accompany him back to the conference room. He went into the room and let the Anbu close the hallway door, but he didn't anticipate turning around and seeing Ronan's partner in front of him. His eyes widened, but before he could start to demand answers, the man's raised hand stopped him. I understand your concern and worry for your daughters. I am here to inform you both are safe and well. Ronan has changed his mind. The Hyuga heiress will receive his protection until the time of her wedding. When will my daughters be returned? Hiyashi asked, nodding rapidly as a wave of relief passed over him. They won't, replied the respondent with a detached voice. Your eldest daughter has now been attacked twice, and it is only a matter of time before the target shifts to your youngest as well. For now, they will stay where they are. We'll be in touch with you soon. Hiyashi didn't want to find out how Ronan's partner had found the uniform, so he refastened the cloth covering for his Anbu disguise. He stopped the man in his tracks as he turned toward the door. What about Hinata's wedding? It is in 5 days. That is not our concern. As I said, we'll be in touch, he said, cocking his head slightly to the side and squinting his eyes slightly before hurriedly leaving the room. Hiyashi realized he couldn't see anything when he turned on his Kekkei Genkai to follow his movements and find his daughter. Thus, they blocked the Byakugan by using seals. An empty hallway greeted him as he hurried to the door and yanked it open. In frustration, he sighed deeply, hoping that his daughter's lives could be entrusted to these two men. He thought, geez, all this running around is bad for my health. As Takeshi leapt out of another window and went back into the north wing, he was more concerned about the image of Nezu with Jun than he was about the concern that was evident in the Hyuga head's eyes. How on earth have we gotten into this situation? He had to tell Naruto this information. Hanabi had set up the space for almost anything after collapsing. The shower rod was able to fit precisely in the door frame near the bottom after positioning the floor lamp sufficiently near, but not too near, the door. She had taken off the lampshade. The kitchen was indeed stocked with cookware, dishes, and even non-perishables, which pleased her. As a last resort, she would use the set of kitchen knives that were carefully concealed on her person. This was a man she had to keep her distance from. She knew he was faster than her because he had blocked multiple Juken strikes. Being several inches taller than her, 5'1" frame gave him an advantage. His physique suggested that he was also strong. Fortunately, she hoped that her stolen tools and their locations would enable her to get past all of that. She knew she could outsmart her attacker, so his statistics didn't matter. She was a Hyuga. After all, he'll be sorry he kidnapped me. All I can hope for is that when I get out of this room, I'll find Hinata. She chewed her thumbnail as she paced the room, impatiently waiting for someone to try the door. With that, Takeshi made his way back to the north wing. Naruto and Hinata were on their way to the end of the wing. Continuing past the suite, he chose to start by seeing how the younger Hyuga was doing. He was not sure why, but he felt obliged to check that she was still present. Even though he had complete faith in the seals Naruto had taught him, that woman still seemed like the kind that could get out of the room. He stopped outside the door and pressed his palm against it, simultaneously releasing chakra. When a seal was exposed, he smeared some of his blood on it by biting his thumb. The seal seemed to glow, then faded again, and he watched. He turned the door slowly and pushed against it. Choosing to enter as quietly as possible, the door opened only an inch, and he paused when it stopped, staring at it as if it would explain this mystery. He sighed. Knowing that the girl must be responsible, he decided to use more force rather than pull the door shut to try again. He tried not to use too much force because he was afraid Hanabi was on the other side of the door. Just open the damn door. He didn't want to hurt her. The door stopped once more. He sighed as he looked down and took a step back before slamming his shoulder against the door. Ah! What on earth is causing her to keep this door closed? The only result of his third attempt to open the door was a bruised shoulder. A more shrewd or patient man might have decided to close and reseal the door if the little witch wanted it to remain closed. He knew she wasn't going anywhere. At least, however, he had to confirm that she was in the room. She could have blocked the door to buy more time before her absence was noticed if she had managed to get out. He stepped back, rotated his shoulder to ease the pain, and kicked the door in. Squinting at the sound in the now broken door frame, he looked down and saw what looked like a curtain rod stuck in the door frame. With a frown on his face, he started to step over it and felt swift movement approaching. Is that a frying pan? In order to prevent the pan from crashing into his head, he shifted his weight to the left and crouched. Rather, the handle struck his shoulder, which had been uninjured. He lost his balance a little because of the new pain. All of his muscles seemed to cramp up at once, giving him a shock before he could stand or straighten himself. It was impossible to describe the agony of his muscles seized. The only thing he could do was look up and see Hanabi standing a few feet away with a metal rod pressed against him before he collided with the tile in the suite's foyer. He hardly noticed the floor rising up to meet him as he lost consciousness. When she said, "Wow, that was easier than I thought," surprised that she had not needed the flour after all, Hanabi threw the broken lamp to the ground. She chose to keep the knives in case she needed them. But she hadn't needed them either. He had been forced to pause at the door by the curtain rod, which allowed her to surprise him in the hopes that it would strike him. She threw the frying pan end over end. He would get even for kidnapping me. She was ready for that, though, and swiftly poked the plugged-in floor lamp's bulb into his chest. As he ducked, the voltage had been just enough to make his muscles cramp and knock him out. She cautiously walked around his prone body, peeking out the door to see if he had backup. Since there was nobody else in the hallway, she continued walking in the direction she thought he had taken her. In order to determine which room her sister was in, she tried to recall how far he had carried her. She stopped in front of a door and used her Byakugan, but the room was empty. Ronin might use the same seal the man was using, or perhaps it might be applied to Hinata. She glanced at the other rooms, observing that they all seemed deserted in this wing. Taking one of her newly acquired knives from the sleeve of her shirt, she sighed and lightly made a small X on the wall near the door running to the end of the wing. Hoping she had guessed correctly, she looked for her father or any other family member. "All right, then, you have my full cooperation." That single, uncomplicated sentence shocked Naruto. Since he was a stranger to her, he hadn't anticipated her giving in so quickly. It goes without saying that he had doubts about her intentions. While he was explaining the situation to her, she had sat on the edge of a couch in the suite's main sitting area. She waited for him to continue. Looking up at him with a firm resolve to cooperate, she had to acknowledge that the silence was a little awkward, but not uncomfortable. She pondered what could have diverted his attention as his eyes appeared to wander. Naruto stood thinking about the woman in front of him in silence. Naturally, there were similarities between her and the girl he had known, but he could also see that she had grown more self-assured over time. The past 8.5 years, on a day at random, Naruto made the decision to train more. He was up earlier than normal as he walked to one of the village's numerous training grounds. The sun was hardly shining at all. It took him a while to realize that the training ground was already occupied after he staggered out of the trees. His jaw dropped open as he stopped in the middle of his stride, blinking his eyes open as if he had just woken up. Hinata Hyuga was there, standing atop a hill that sloped slightly. He observed her moving elegantly through what he could only assume were the positions of her family's well-known fighting style. The sun's ascent into the sky, which emphasized the fluidity of her movements, captivated him and made him want to get a closer look. He edged around the field to get a better look, never taking his eyes off the girl for long as he stepped lightly into the tree line to his left. What's the reason behind my hiding? Hinata is the only one. Why he felt the need to watch his comrade in secret was beyond him. All he knew was that he was behaving like a strange stalker due to an unidentified desire. Maybe because Hinata always seemed so strange to him and frequently fainted when he approached her. How does she finish missions when she constantly faints at random? Silently thanking Kami for not using her Kekkei Genkai during this training, he capitalized on the fact that she was not aware of his presence. He could tell that Hinata had been at this training session for a long time based on her haggard appearance, even though the sun was hardly shining on the sky. He dragged his gaze away from her captivating image as he looked around the training area in the morning light. He discovered shallow craters where Kaden, her family's defensive palm rotation, had been executed. Further away was a wooden training dummy that looked to have sustained significant damage. He was perplexed by this since he was aware that the gentle fist fighting method relied on accuracy rather than force to strike particular points within the chakra network. He pondered whether she was trying a new fighting technique, learning a new jutsu, or if she was experiencing some discomfort. He glanced back at Hinata as soon as he heard a feminine gasp, only to blush when he realized she had finally chosen to use her Baikugan, and wince in embarrassment. She was now staring directly at him as he hid in the trees. Her own cheeks burned pink, and her face twisted slightly in bewilderment. "Na Naruto-kun?" she said so softly that he had to read her lips to know she had called his name. The jig is up. Then, in an attempt to conceal his own embarrassment, he walked out of the trees while grinning broadly and massaging the back of his head. "Hi, Hinata, sorry, I didn't mean to spy. I was actually coming to do some early training myself, but I didn't want to disturb you." "Oh," Hinata exclaimed, lowering her gaze and turning her fist to her mouth. That's all right, Na Naruto-kun." Her shyness and unease were not given much attention by Naruto. The sun rose over the tree line behind her, but he was too preoccupied with the glow all around her. "Wow. Hinata appears somewhat lovely in this way." He couldn't think of another word to describe the image in front of him, but it felt really strange for him to think that about anyone besides his Sakura-chan. As Hinata wondered why Naruto was merely staring at her, her face began to heat up even more. She started to walk past him with her head down, but was stopped when his hand only lightly touched her arm. Well, I should probably get back to the compound. Bye Naruto-kun." She looked up and said, "Why yes, Naruto-kun?" with a mixture of curiosity, fear, and anxiety. His smile turned to a worried expression, and he warned, "But I think you shouldn't be out here alone before the sun is up. I wouldn't want anything to happen to you." Naruto felt compelled to tell her, "Hinata, I have to say, just watching you train, you were really impressive. It's clear all this training is paying off." Knowing that he would have regretted his, typically male, remark if he had said it to one of the more independent kunoichi, such as Sakura or Ino, he cringed a little after saying it. However, Hinata swayed slightly on her feet, her face flushed bright red. "Hinata, are you okay?" he asked with a worried expression on his face. As Naruto voiced concern for her well-being, Hinata felt every drop of blood in her body move to her face. The edges of her vision became somewhat blurry, and she even started to feel lightheaded. Hinata forced her lungs to drag in the necessary oxygen as he asked her if she was okay. "Come on, Hinata. Try to be normal, at least don't blow it again by fainting. He's right in front of you." With a weak smile, she replied, "I'm fine, Naruto-kun. Thank you for your concern." Naruto replied, "No problem, Hinata," with his customary zeal. She turned to go again, but Naruto stopped her because he was bothered by something. Since Hinata seemed to have been out here for a while before the sun rose, he thought it would be polite to check to see if she was bothered by anything. After offering to listen to her problems, he turned his head down in embarrassment and said, "Hey Hinata, did something upset you? Sending you out here so late last night? You can talk to me about it, if you want." Hinata was taken aback. Maybe her beloved Naruto-kun wasn't as unaware as everyone thought. In fact, she was tempted to put the weight of her thoughts on his shoulders. Everything about Naruto seemed to shout that he could and would take on any task. She knew he had plenty of his own concerns, but it would be great to have him there to support her through her difficulties. She grinned at Naruto and said, "I just couldn't sleep." The young girl was spared another smile by Naruto, who said, "Oh, okay Hinata, if you want to train late at night again, I won't mind coming with you, so feel free to ask, okay? He is concerned about me. Oh, I'm being pinched by someone. Don't. If this is all some fantastic fantasy, I won't wake up." Hinata was on the edge of fainting again, but she was only able to conceal a smile behind her hand. "Okay Naruto-kun. There you are Hinata-sama. I've been searching for you for hours. Please, you must return to the compound with me. Your father is concerned over your absence." Ko hurried from the trees before she could say another word. The young man spoke in a breathless rush, attempting to convey urgency while catching his breath. "Hi, Ko-san." Hinata returned to Naruto. Thank you again Naruto-kun for your concern, but I must go now. I bid you well in your own training." She hurried over to Ko, and the two of them leapt into the trees, probably heading back to the Hyuga compound after Ko arrived. Naruto couldn't help but laugh at the formality she displayed and the softness of her voice. "She keeps coming out here to train so late by herself, and I sincerely hope she stops with regret," he thought. Now, after all these years, Naruto had forgotten about that fleeting moment. To be honest, he was surprised by the memory with the orange and pink rays of dawn softly stroking her skin. She had truly looked stunning that morning. Now, geez, I sound like a trashy novel by Ero Sennin or a woman. Now that he thought about it, he realized how awkward and bashful Hinata had been as an adult with some life experience. He now understood the potential causes of her frequent facial flushing, stuttering, and fainting. He gave a small smile behind his mask before the woman in front of him pulled his attention back to the here and now. Hinata looked away a little, finally deciding to ease the mounting tension. So what do we do now? He had a lot of questions, memories, and thoughts running through his head at the time. He crossed his arms over his chest and gave himself a mental shake. He replied, "Well, now we can get you something to eat, I suppose," as he peered out the window at the last of the day. As if he had grown a second head, Hinata cocked her head to the side and said, "Well, that wasn't what I was expecting you to say." She noticed a slight squint in what seemed to be a smile. "What can I say? I tend to be a bit unpredictable." Even though his remark was innocent, it made her frown for a half-second before she chose to do the same. She leapt to her feet and tried to show some excitement. "All right, what does a famed assassin feed an abducted person he's protecting?" He shook his head a little and snorted with laughter before turning to go to the sweets kitchenette. "That depends on what is in the kitchen." She paused after him, scratching her nose, and said, "Oh, these things aren't usually stocked with supplies until right before a guest arrives, so there probably isn't anything available." He just gave her a quick glance and raised an eyebrow before opening the refrigerator and revealing all of its contents. "Wah? How did you get so much food in here?" Hinata asked, her eyes widening. Holding the refrigerator door open, Ronan shrugged and said, "We assassins have our ways, so what will it be?" Her face turned a pretty light pink as her stomach decided to give a little growl. At that precise moment he couldn't help but laugh at her embarrassment as her eyes seemed to dart everywhere but at him. It was strange to see a man who seemed so aloof and cold laughing, but Hinata's eyes finally met his as he laughed. But before either of them could say anything more, they heard a boom in the distance. Ronan hurriedly shut the refrigerator and came over to her, and they both turned to face the door. He gently grasped her upper arm and led her back to the bedroom. "I need you to go in the bathroom, get in the tub and stay down." Outraged, Hinata stopped in the middle of the sitting room and exclaimed, "What? No, I'm perfectly capable of defending myself." "Yeah, and we've seen the evidence of that with your last abduction, I was drugged while sleeping. I wasn't exactly given the chance to fight back." His tone was sharp as he said, "Really, are you making excuses now? Sleeping is one of the worst things you can do when being hunted." He gave her a confused look. "Well, excuse me, Mr. Trained Assassin, but I wasn't aware I was being hunted." To at least get her into the bedroom for protection, Ronan kept pulling on her arm before slamming the door in her face. He gave her one last firm pull on the arm, knocking her off balance and sending her into the room. "Look, be a sweetie, get in there before someone barges in here to kill us both." As he heard a faint scratching sound outside the door, he hurriedly sealed it to keep her in. He stood a few feet away and to the right of the door, bracing his feet apart. He waited and waited for someone to storm in. Hinata made every effort she could to open the door to the bedroom. At last, she decided to just scream obscene insults at him and bang on it. Naruto found some amusement in hearing Hinata taunt him while he waited. When did the shy, soft-spoken girl start speaking that way? The doorknob started to turn. After what felt like hours of waiting for an attack, he dashed forward, ready to kill, his ninjutsu unsheathed as it swung open. When he saw Takeshi stumble into the room, looking terribly unkempt, he stopped short. His friend was standing in front of him, his sungakure and head wrap soiled. He was missing the cloth that was meant to conceal his face. "What happened?" Naruto asked, his voice descending into a low rumble as he studied Takeshi's appearance. When Naruto hurried him, Takeshi wasn't even startled or alarmed. It was to be expected. Who could blame him for forgetting to knock, since he was still experiencing mini seizures all over his body? All because of the unpleasant electrical shock that he received from the dreadful Hyuga. "What do you think happened?" "The little brat arranged a welcome back party for me after I reported to her father. She threw a frying pan at me." "A frying pan? Then she electrocuted me with a floor lamp, a freaking floor lamp." A full-bellied laugh seemed to erupt from Naruto as he attempted to control his amusement at Takeshi's predicament. A stooped Takeshi leaned on the doorframe and gave him death glares. "Oh, you think that's funny? Well, here's one you'll find hilarious. She escaped." "What?" Naruto's laughter froze in his throat. "Yeah, you heard me right, she escaped." Something struck Naruto, and he went out into the hall to inspect the walls surrounding the doorframe. He stormed back into the room and started gathering the packs he had made for Hinata and himself. She marked the room. "We have to leave." With his hands extended at his sides, Takeshi gazed around incredulously and said, "And where do we go?" "This is where we always hole up while in this village, unless you got another hideout somewhere that I've been unaware of all these years. We have nowhere to go." Naruto decided not to answer, instead aiming daggers at his young friend. He didn't want to go there, but he knew where they were going they would become more isolated from the Hyuga clan and run the risk of being discovered while being transported. Hanabi made sure to let Hiyashi know where they were. Naruto wasn't going to take any chances. Even though the man might be on their side, Hinata's attackers must have had assistance because all of the attacks had been too simple and convenient. It was one of his favorite spots to relax in Suna, and he detested leaving the room. Nobody anticipated the Ronin would be hiding in a pricey suite at the Hoshi Inn. Gaara had considered it to allow Naruto to stay whenever he needed to. He kept the room rented and stocked with food. He now detested the idea of getting in touch with Gaara to inform him that this place was unusable due to exposure. He swung the bedroom door open after unsealing it, but he remained a distance away in case Hinata chose to follow Hanabi's lead and attack. She crossed her arms over her chest and stood in the center of the room. It pushed her breasts up, highlighting that area of her body, but he tried not to notice. He turned away from her, expecting her to follow him. Time to go, Hyuga-han. He said he was taking his frustration with the way things had fallen apart around him out on her. It would be safe to assume that they had previously been on good terms. Even though he detested admitting it, he had started to feel a connection with her that brought back memories of his former self. He had a valid reason for not permitting it. He halted when he saw that she had not moved at all and was still standing in the center of the room. "We're leaving. Move it." "Yeah, I know what's going on, I can hear you know, but that's no reason for you to turn into an asshole." He was a little surprised that Takeshi was the only one who ever argued with him. Her persistence impressed him and made him laugh a little, but they had no time for this. Instead, she chose to spend the time arguing, apologizing, or doing anything else. She expected moving the two small packs into one hand. He approached her and presented her with a black piece of cloth. Hinata's eyes were the only ones to drop to the cloth he extended to her. "What is that?" He questioned whether she could be any more contemptuous. In answering that straightforward question, his gaze moved over her entire body, observing her appearance from head to toe. "It's a mask. We can't risk anyone recognizing you while we're escaping. You should probably pull your hair up too. And if you can manage it, a hinge on your eyes." His demeanor was so abrupt that Hinata had to remove the mask from him before she could argue further with a pointed hand gesture. Ronin interrupted her, saying, "You said I'd have your full cooperation. Were you lying? If not, prove it now. Your hesitation is risking your own life." She put the mask on over her head after taking a deep, soothing breath. She observed that his covering of her face from the bridge of her nose down was exactly like that. She tied her hair up in a ponytail with a piece of ribbon that he ripped from the bed's comforter. She looked at him in anticipation of his blessing with a firm nod. He gently took hold of her upper arm once more and led her into the living room. His haughty ways were really starting to get on her nerves. Ordinarily, she would just have to comply with him out of courtesy. Those circumstances did not apply here. Knowing how urgent it was to get out of the room, she decided to comply with him anyhow. However, she would no longer put up with his behavior once they were settled somewhere else. Ronin's friend was sitting slouched against the bar separating the sitting room and kitchenette. When they crossed the room to him, he certainly appears a little more worn out. Hanabi did a fantastic job on him. Wow, the fact that her younger sister had brought this cocky young man to his knees filled her with pride. If only I could treat his friend in the same way now. She paused in the middle of her thought when she noticed her reflection in one of the windows. She had thought that the clothes Ronin had made for her earlier were her own. They felt like they were made of the same material and had fit perfectly. However, as her vision improved, she saw that although the fabric and cut were similar, the color was clearly different. He had given her dark black clothing. She really didn't recognize herself when she looked in them. Her hair pulled up for once, a mask over her face. Naturally, avoiding recognition was the goal, but the contrasts were striking. Her eyes were a dead giveaway to who she was, at least until she saw them. She closed them and performed the transformation jutsu on her eyes only. Using the required hand seal, her eyes were now light blue. When she opened them once more to see her reflection, she wrinkled her face a little, realizing that the only thing visible through the mask was the wrinkled area between her eyebrows. "I don't find that look appealing." "Well?" she asked the two assassins as she turned away from the window and held her arms loosely out to her sides. Waiting for a response, Ronin's eyes passed over her. Then he turned away entirely to shut the suite's still open door before she angled herself so both men were within her periphery. She watched him walk toward the window on the other end of the sitting room.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.